Chapter 187. Escape. All the way to the north. He didn't know where he was. He had been chased for many days, and he spent most of his time struggling and running. It didn't matter where he was now, because Gu Hanshan only knew that he was still in East Island. About a week ago, he passed by the city where he needed emergency supplies. Now he was probably fleeing to the northeast. Other than that, he knew nothing, and he didn't care to find out anything. Zhongjing Icehouse Jubin Nara Ninghu. In the never-ending chase, Gu Hanshan only remembered that he escaped from one city after another, from the urban area to the wilderness, and then back to the urban area. He rested for supplies for a short time, fought desperately, and fled in a panic. To the north. He could only go north. The days of fleeing had made him lose contact with everyone in Zhongzhou State. The dark side of East Island was about to rise, but it was still calm on the surface. Gu Hanshan couldn't collect any information, so he didn't know the plan of Zhongzhou State. He even lost the hunting list at the beginning. He had completely let go of the so-called task and honor. Surviving was the most basic goal. No matter what, he had to survive. The light gradually dimmed. There was no twilight on the horizon. The torrential rain that started from Dongdu had completely covered the whole territory of East Island for days. There had been small-scale tsunamis in several port cities. The sky had been gloomy all the time, from morning to night, and from gloomy to gloomier. In his sight, the undulating barren mountains continued to spread at the end of his sight, and he couldn't see the end. The sky was getting dark, and the whole mountain range seemed to be faintly showing a hint of gloom and horror. The torrential rain fell from the sky, accompanied by the strong wind. Endless weeds rose and fell, and the midsummer air became cold in the rain. There was no light around. Night was coming. Darkness was coming. Desolate, cold, gloomy, and dark. Under the storm, the whole world seemed to have come to an end. Everything in sight seemed to be emitting a kind of doomsday brilliance. Gu Hanshan also seemed to be a little powerless. In the weeds that were half a man's height, he lowered his body, took out a compressed biscuit, tore it open, and stuffed it into his mouth. He swallowed it along with the rain on the horizon. The chase had been going on for nearly half a month. He had been injured several times and fought several times. His supplies had long been used up. Some medicine that could temporarily increase his combat power, medicine that could heal his injuries, and medicine that could replenish his physical strength had been used up about a week ago. Even the compressed biscuits he had now were looted from a supermarket when he risked his life to rush into Changya a few days ago. The tragic thing was that the supplies that were looted from the supermarket were now all used up. It was not that Gu Hanshan had not thought of rushing into the city to do something big, but after thinking about it, Gu Hanshan gave up his plan. What could he do if he rushed into the city? At most, he would only be able to control some unimportant hostages, but he would have to risk being discovered by countless people. Zhongzhou State was plotting against East Island. Now every city in East Island was closely monitored by the top. Gu Hanshan could even be 100% sure that once he went to the city, his whereabouts would be exposed within half an hour. At that time, even if he controlled more hostages, so what? In the battle of the dark world, hostages were never the most important. Only some barren mountains with complicated terrain were the best route for him to escape. But he was not desperate in a desperate situation. In the dark storm, Gu Hanshan's figure was hidden in the grass, and he swallowed the last bit of food in his mouth expressionlessly. The deep exhaustion and weakness almost seeped out from his bone marrow. Gu Hanshan felt that he would fall down at any time. The darkness filled the sky. Between reality and illusion, he also felt that his eyes went black for a while. He shook his head hard, sat up in the grass, and began to meditate. Meditation was the fastest way to recover spirit. Gu Hanshan had the heavenly king heart. When he entered the meditative state from the silent state, his speed was completely incredible. Because of this, he had enough willpower to drag his tired body to run for so long, and he even had a slight breakthrough in martial arts. But as time went by, Gu Hanshan had more and more clearly understood that it seemed that this kind of persistence was coming to an end. The hunt from the superior of the half-step invincible realm was getting fiercer and faster. No matter how fast he ran and how sensitive he was to danger, this was East Island after all. and the opponent could use countless resources to lock his position immediately. 3 days. 3 days at most, and then he might really be at the end of his road. He meditated for less than 10 minutes. Gu Hanshan had opened his eyes quickly. He sat up in the grass, lowered his body, and started to move forward toward the endless mountain range ahead. 10 minutes of rest was luxurious enough, and it was also risky enough. 3 hours ago, he escaped from Tengu, the superior of the half-step invincible realm, who was chasing him. 20 minutes ago he got rid of him. During this time, it was enough for the opponent to lock his position again. But Gu Hanshan had to stop. He really couldn't hold on any longer. The footsteps in the grass were getting faster and faster. Suppressing the feeling of blackness and dizziness, Gu Hanshan clenched his fists and went all the way north. He couldn't determine his specific location now, but he could roughly understand that after crossing the endless mountain range in front of him, and continuing to go forward for dozens of kilometers, he should be able to reach Toyama or New Island. As long as he was careful enough, he could take a boat from any port in these two places, and continue to go north to the south of Beihai Province in Zhongzhou State. Although the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City weren't on good terms, with the former's magnanimity, he wouldn't run into trouble if he fled there. As long as he went ashore in Beihai Province, he would be safe. But this time, the task and the competition with Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan didn't bother to think about it. Speed up. Climb the mountain. Gu Hanshan clenched his teeth and moved faster and faster. In the heavy rain, thunder rolled across the sky, and the mountains seemed to be trembling in the thunder. Pale lightning flashed across the dark sky. The crisis was like an exploding tide, shrouding Gu Hanshan in an instant. There was no time to think. The blazing, solid bright fire instantly covered Gu Hanshan's whole body. The flames surged wildly. The moment the fire lit up, his body rushed forward. At the same time, a large piece of blue lightning fell directly from the top of Gu Hanshan's head. The large piece of fire was smashed by the lightning, splashing sparks and falling on the grassland soaked by the wind and rain. The water vapor was evaporated in an instant, and the wild grass burned wildly. The bleak night was illuminated by the warm fire. In the fire, Gu Hanshan's firm face seemed to be pale and transparent. Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Wuji Palace, who took action as soon as the thunder sounded, floated in the air expressionlessly. A large amount of lightning swayed around him. Standing in the air, he looked mysterious and powerful, but his face was abnormally pale. Countless bolts of lightning struck the fire on Gu Hanshan's body, and the fire grew. Finally, when the fire disappeared, the lightning in front of Heavenly Hound also disappeared at the same time. Only the sparks that fell on the ground were still spreading rapidly. The fire quickly burned the wild grass about 10 meters around Gu Hanshan, and then it was extinguished by the rain. Thick smoke billowed. Heavenly Hound stared at Gu Hanshan through the thick smoke. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, with cruelty and resentment. He said softly, "Run, keep running. Do you think you can still run away?" Gu Hanshan looked at Heavenly Hound in front of him quietly and said flatly, "Do you think you can catch up with me?" The corners of Heavenly Hound's mouth twitched fiercely, and the fire of anger in his eyes suddenly burned. "I can't catch up with you. If I wanted to kill you, you could have died at least 10 times in so many days. The young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State? Oh bullshit." Gu Hanshan was expressionless and did not speak. He knew that Heavenly Hound was telling the truth. So what if he was a young heavenly son? The realm gap between them was so huge that it couldn't be made up. If Heavenly Hound didn't want to catch him alive, Gu Hanshan would have died long ago in the continuous pursuit. In the isolation of the fire and the thick smoke, Gu Hanshan seemed to squint slightly, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He didn't bother to think why Heavenly Hound wanted to catch him alive. There were only a few reasons. He wouldn't be so arrogant to think that he was the best in the world, but he had never belittled himself. His talent and his identity were enough to make him one of the most important people among all the people from Zhongzhou State who sneaked into East Island this time. This kind of importance was undoubtedly a bargaining chip in the eyes of the people from East Island. Once he fell into the hands of the people from East Island, he would become a very important bargaining chip in the hands of East Island. At that time, East Island would have enough confidence to use him as a bargaining chip to negotiate with Zhongzhou State or trade with Kunlun City. Gu Hanshan took a deep breath. He suddenly felt grateful for his identity, and it was precisely because of this identity that he could seize the opportunity. Yes, it was an opportunity. The continuous struggle between life and death for many days squeezed out a lot of his potential. Gu Hanshan, who was already at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, finally made further progress. Although he didn't completely enter the thunder-shocking realm, he had half of his foot in that realm. The gap between the half-step thunder-shocking realm and the half-step invincible realm was still huge. But Gu Hanshan had the core of Kunlun City's 10 skills of true martial arts, especially the 9th secluded impasse. That move could be regarded as the pseudo-domain in the invincible realm. Gu Hanshan was barely able to use it when he was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. After he reached the half-step thunder-shocking realm, he had a deeper understanding of this move. In fact, after such a long pursuit, almost all the injuries on Heavenly Hound were caused by Gu Hanshan in the pseudo-domain of the 9th secluded impasse. Superiors of the half-step invincible realm could also vaguely form pseudo-domains. But in terms of domains, the inheritance of 10 skills of true martial arts was far better than that of Heavenly Hound. Heavenly Hound's pseudo-domain only existed a little longer than that of the 9th secluded impasse. But at the moment when the pseudo-domains of the two sides collided, Gu Hanshan would rush up and fight with Heavenly Hound several times without hesitation. That was a way of fighting in which both sides would suffer, or even perish together. Heavenly Hound didn't want to die, so he could only get injured in defense. In half a month, Heavenly Hound was consuming Gu Hanshan's physical strength and willpower, and Gu Hanshan was also consuming Heavenly Hound's state. There was another move, the 9th secluded impasse. Gu Hanshan narrowed his eyes slightly, and there seemed to be some hesitation in his eyes. Based on the current state of both sides, once the 9th secluded impasse appeared, Gu Hanshan had at least a 40% chance to kill Heavenly Hound, and a 20% chance to retreat with serious injuries. In this way, Gu Hanshan himself didn't know how much chance he had to kill Heavenly Hound and retreat with serious injuries. It must not be high. But this kind of low chance was quite worth a try in the current desperate situation. A bit of fire gradually bloomed between Gu Hanshan's hands. In the barren mountain where the fire had been extinguished by the rain, the extremely horrifying high temperature instantly rose. The heavy rain was still falling, but it had been completely evaporated before it reached Gu Hanshan's head. That bit of fire spread slowly and elegantly, enveloping Gu Hanshan's palm, and then covering his right arm. Gu Hanshan still looked at Heavenly Hound calmly. Faint but extremely strong killing intent had risen and diffused with the raging fire, spreading between heaven and earth. Heavenly Hound's eyes suddenly shrank. He narrowed his eyes and sneered. "What? Are you going to fight with your life? Do you think you deserve it?" Gu Hanshan didn't say a word. His body suddenly took a step forward. In an instant, Heavenly Hound thought of the 9th secluded impasse that he had encountered several times in the past half a month, the 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City, and Gu Hanshan's constantly increasing strength. Almost instinctively, Heavenly Hound sensed the danger and suddenly took a step back. "You don't dare to fight?" Gu Hanshan slightly raised his eyebrows, and there seemed to be a trace of mockery in his calm tone. Heavenly Hound's face suddenly turned red, and he flew into a rage. But before he could speak, another voice had suddenly sounded in the void. "He doesn't dare, but we do." In the sky dozens of meters away, the deep blue lightning suddenly flashed subtle and dim. Gu Hanshan's hair suddenly stood on end. Although the lightning was dozens of meters away, the unprecedented danger seemed to have appeared around him. "Retreat!" The raging fire suddenly rose to the sky, and the airflow suddenly twisted. The weeds on the ground and the ashes after burning all flew up in an instant. In front of Gu Hanshan, a large area of space seemed to be compressed violently, and the air was forcibly squeezed out and turned into airwaves. His body retreated to a safe distance of 20 meters away with the impact of the airwaves in the blink of an eye, and the sound of violent compression kept coming from that twisted space. 9th secluded impasse. That pseudo-domain covered the space with a radius of more than 10 meters. A large piece of deep blue light rushed into the pseudo-domain at a fast speed. The The lightning suddenly became stagnant. A man in a standard ninja costume floated in the air when the lightning dissipated. His hands holding the dagger struggled subconsciously, and his eyes were shocked. The opportunity was lost. Guhanzhan had no time to be upset or rejoice. He turned around and left without hesitation. His body turned in the dark. A pair of playful and charming eyes appeared directly in front of Guhanzhan. The two of them were so close that the moment he turned around, Guhanzhan almost kissed her directly. He forcibly stopped himself, and his face suddenly changed dramatically. He didn't know when a woman in black suddenly appeared behind him. Guhanzhan didn't know how long she had been standing behind him. If he hadn't turned around, he would even think that there was nothing behind him. This was a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She had a very stylish short hair. Because the two of them were so close, Guhanzhan could even see the fine wrinkles at the corners of her eyes on her face that was no longer young. But this was not an ugly woman. Guhanzhan completely subconsciously stepped back and tilted his head back. The woman's face suddenly appeared completely in his sight. It was a very mature and charming face, full of charm, with a very frivolous and flirtatious look, but not the slightest bit of killing intent. Guhanzhan's body just took a step back, and in an instant, he was pulled forward again. The woman's face became bigger in his sight again. A pair of soft arms hooked around his neck, and a mouth with a little fragrance directly pressed on his lips. It was a brief touch. Before Guhanzhan could react, the woman who kissed him giggled and said softly in a sweet voice that sounded like a girl's panting. "Ninth secluded impasse? Good unique skill, but it's a pity that you are too young." The sharp pain instantly spread all over his body. There was lightning flashing in front of Guhanzhan. Vaguely, he only saw a pair of tender white palms surrounded by lightning covering his chest slowly and gently. Bang! In the dull sound, Guhanzhan spat out a mouthful of blood. His body flew more than 10 meters into the sky, and finally fell heavily at the feet of the black-clothed ninja in the ninth secluded impasse. Guhanzhan gritted his teeth and struggled to stand up, but his body was getting weaker and weaker. Heavenly Hound, who was also a little sluggish because of the series of changes, finally reacted. With a trace of fear and unconcealable anger in his tone, he said coldly, "Demon Black Crow, what do you mean?" The black-clothed ninja codenamed Black Crow said nothing. Then he put away the two daggers in his hands and looked at Guhanzhan, who was struggling at his feet, thoughtfully. However, the charming and frivolous woman chuckled and said softly, "Heavenly Hound, you are too incompetent. Your ability to handle matters has disappointed everyone. So, Liuhua Palace will take over the task of hunting Guhanzhan." Demon, the deputy palace master of Liuhua Palace in East Island, was one of the top ninjas in the whole Dark World, and a superior a half-step to Invincible Realm. And Black Crow, who acted with her, was the top superior ninja of Liuhua Palace. His strength was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, so he could not be ignored either. Incompetent. If it weren't for you guys, I would have caught him in one day at most. You guys are. Heavenly Hound was completely furious. Guhanzhan was also a very important figure in Zhongzhou State. He was known as the Young Heavenly Sun. Catching him was definitely a great achievement. At the same time, he was also an extremely difficult young opponent. Heavenly Hound had chased him for so long. Seeing that Guhanzhan couldn't hold on any longer, Liuhua Palace suddenly jumped out to take his credit, and said that he was incompetent. Heavenly Hound almost fell from the air. His body trembled violently, and he stared at Demon, who was smiling charmingly, and gnashed his teeth. However, before he could finish speaking, Chimei had already interrupted him coldly. "One day? Does Wuji Palace have no concept of time? Heavenly Hound, how chaotic is East Island now? One day? Humph, maybe in half a day. The special warfare system of East Island will be dismantled by those superiors from all over the world. His Highness Miyamoto, even the imperial family, and the office of the Prime Minister can't tolerate your incompetence anymore. Otherwise, Black Crow and I wouldn't have taken action. Do you think we are willing to take your credit?" His Highness Miyamoto, the imperial family, the office of the Prime Minister. Heavenly Hound's face changed from red to white, and he was so embarrassed that he wanted to hide himself. "No matter what, I chased him here. Even without you guys, he can't run away. Demon, give me Guhanshan and let me take him back to Wuji Palace. Then, I'll forget what happened tonight. Heavenly Hound kept silent for 5 minutes and then slowly said, Wuji Palace? Demon smiled softly and shook her head. I think he's more suitable to be a guest in Liuhua Palace. Heavenly Hound raised his eyebrows. Before he could say anything, another abrupt voice rang out. We think he's more suitable to go to Changdao. It was perfect Chinese. Demon's smile froze, and her face suddenly changed. She screamed, Black Crow. Her words were hurried and high-pitched, but it was too late. A bone-chilling sword intent suddenly spread all over the barren mountain. The sword intent was surging and condensing. The sword momentum was silent. The wild wind in the air suddenly blew violently and turned into a storm. All the weeds around were swept up into the sky, flying messily. The turbulent airflow surged wildly. Demon closed her eyes subconsciously. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. For ice walls suddenly rose up around Guhanshan. Along with the appearance of the ice walls, there were 2 rays of sword light that were as cold as glaciers. 2 beams of sword light silently flashed out from the swaying weeds. Everyone's eyes flashed faintly, and the 2 beams of sword light directly merged into one. Demon had just screamed when the 2 rays of sword light rushed to the front of Black Crow. Bright and sharp lightning burst out in front of the sword light, accompanied by blood and broken ice all over the sky. The ice walls around Guhanshan were instantly broken, and so was Black Crow's body. The sword light was like lightning, drawing 100-meter-long icy straight line in the barren mountain. 2 figures hid under a ray of sword light, grabbed Guhanshan, and kept moving forward in the flashing lightning and sword light. In the blink of an eye, they flew nearly 100 meters away. Both Demon and Heavenly Hound seemed to be confused for a moment. Clap! The broken ice all over the sky fell to the ground with blood and flesh. Demon's body suddenly shook, and she suddenly reacted. She screamed, Who the hell is it? Heavenly Hound's face was solemn and gloomy. People from Kunlun City. Ice Soul Ice Frost. He took a deep breath, gave Demon a hard look, and turned to leave. Where are you going? Chimei let out a shrill scream. Back to Wuji Palace. Heavenly Hound said coldly. If you are not afraid of death, go after him. Demon gritted her teeth and looked at Heavenly Hound's back motionless. Ice Soul Ice Frost. These 2 code names might be a little strange in the dark world, but if they were combined, they would be really well known. Kunlun City. Ice Soul and Ice Frost Sword. They might be the most famous pair of twin brothers in the dark world. Both of them were only superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But they had the sharpness that made most superiors of the half-step invincible realm retreat. Demon's eyes flickered for a while, but she didn't go after them. After all, like Heavenly Hound, she didn't want to die. Chapter 188. Defeat. When the ultimate attack and the perfect defense failed, any superior, no matter the young Heavenly Son, or the superior of the half-step invincible realm, could only be defeated, and then walked on the road of defeat and death. From Wakayama to Changdao, they crossed thousands of miles, covered in blood, and fled in defeat. The heavy rain fell hysterically in the forest with crazy momentum. The heavy rain lasted for several days, and the forest was muddy everywhere. The wet and slippery ground had a slight upward slope, like a low hill. When going up against the slope, one needed to maintain physical strength and couldn't fly in the air. Every step was extremely uncomfortable. The rumbling footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer, as if thousands of horses and soldiers were galloping. The rapidly falling raindrops surrounded the entire forest, but it was difficult to cover the charging footsteps. It was as if thunder was striking the ground, and the dull, thunderous footsteps reverberated continuously, causing the entire forest to tremble. Swift, fierce, tireless, and full of killing intent. In their sight, a metal monster, at least 2 meters tall, was moving straight all the way. The trees in front of him didn't seem to exist in his eyes, and they were broken in the straight way. One by one, the trees kept falling as he moved forward. The clear cracking sound of tree trunks broke through the sound of the rain. And now it was particularly ear-piercing. Damn it again? Doesn't this monster have any weakness? In front of the forest, Wang Shengxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, known as the strongest expert of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, looked at the tall figure rushing toward him. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he finally couldn't help but swear. This young prodigy, who was gentle most of the time, had a pale face. His clothes were tattered, dirty, and stained with mud and blood. He looked like a beggar, but his mental state was not bad. At the very least, when he cursed, he was full of energy. If he really had a weakness, he wouldn't be the leader of the Kusanagi force. A woman in black stood beside Wang Shengxiao and said in a flat tone. Black seemed to be the woman's biggest feature. She wore black clothes, black shoes, black hair, and even her skin was dark. The woman wasn't beautiful because her appearance was too plain, and it was hard to tell her age. This was a woman who wouldn't attract attention anywhere, but she had a pair of extremely weird eyes. Black eyes. Her eyes were huge, but there was no white in her pupils. They were all black, and a faint luster flickered in her pupils. They were dim and gloomy, like a malicious spirit, making people shudder. She stood quietly beside Wang Shengxiao, watching the metal monster approaching, motionless. Run. They were indeed running, but running in front of this monster was a joke in this kind of weather. This was a monster that had been modified to the point where it was no longer human. It knew no exhaustion, never gave up, and had absolute defense and attack power. In this kind of environment, running away with their backs facing it was equivalent to seeking death. The woman narrowed her eyes, which were so creepy and chilling. She looked at the metal monster that was getting closer and closer. Her dark face was abnormally pale, and even a little blue. She looked extremely weak. In such a state, no one could tell that she was a top master in the dark world. Black pupil from the Wang family of Beihai. Within the Wang family of Beihai, which was full of experts and had a deep foundation, her strength might not be at the top, but she was very close to it. An expert who was extremely close to the half-step invincible realm, even if there was no room for improvement, would be the top existence in any superpower. Energy. A deep voice suddenly sounded, calm and hoarse. A middle-aged man who looked like he was in his 40s stood on the other side of Wang Shengxiao. From his position, he was even a little closer to Wang Shengxiao and Black Pupil. That was the position where he could withstand the most attacks and fight back first. Once the battle broke out, he could minimize the attacks on the two people behind him. The man was a little short and fat. The expression on his round face was calm, but there seemed to be lightning flashing in the depths of his eyes. He looked calm and intense. Closer. Closer and closer. In the heavy rain, the metal armor on the metal monster that was rushing toward them had begun to deform slightly. Almost in the blink of an eye, it changed from the charging form to the fighting form. The muzzle on the shoulder, the saber on the arm, and the gun barrel on the finger were exposed one by one. 50 meters. 30 meters. The rain hit the armor crazily. The armor made of special alloy shone with a cold and sharp light, with a smell of death. 20 meters. The man suddenly reached out and whispered, "Young master, the sword." Without hesitation, Wang Shengxiao directly threw the broad-bladed heavy sword that weighed more than 50 kilograms to the middle-aged man in front of him. The sword was named Firmament. The middle-aged man's code name in the Wang family of Beihai was also Firmament. It was not a coincidence that he had the same name as the sword. Wang Shengxiao, who had the wind and thunder veins, held the Firmament sword, and Firmament himself was Wang Shengxiao's guardian since childhood. He was the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Even in the Wang family of Beihai, in terms of combat capability, Firmament could be ranked in the top 5. The heavy greatsword slashed through the air, bringing with it a dull whistling sound. Firmament's fingers bent slightly. In the airflow, the sword hilt fell directly into his hand. In an instant, Firmament's eyes stood up, and the lightning flashing in the depths of his eyes burst out without reservation. Firmament held the firmament. The rain all over the sky suddenly quieted down. The pseudo-domain of the superior of the half-step invincible realm spread out in an instant. An extremely violent sword intent suddenly burst out from the sword tip of Firmament and rushed straight into the sky. After the metal monster put on the armor, his body, which weighed at least 1,000 kilograms, suddenly slowed down in the pseudo-domain. But the weapons on his body were completely ready for battle. The heavy rain all over the sky stopped for a moment, and then became violent in an instant. The crazy raindrops gathered in front of Firmament without any pattern. The dazzling lightning burst out from his body and mixed with the rain, directly forming a huge water ball with lightning flashing and expanding in front of the three people. At the same time, all the weapons on the metal monster were aimed at Firmament and the other two people. Boom! In the dull roar, the huge body of the metal monster paused. The armor on both sides of his legs and arms suddenly emitted a large amount of gas. Under the full operation of the thrusters, his whole body completely ignored Firmament's pseudo-domain and completely approached the water ball that enveloped the three people. Fierce gunshots suddenly rang out. On the metal monster's gloves, every gun barrel was madly spitting out tongues of fire. The rain-like bullets splashed on the water ball around Firmament, bringing a large amount of ripples with lightning. His two arm blades had directly pierced into the water ball under the huge force. This was a confrontation between technology and force. There was no communication, no testing. The moment the two sides approached each other, they went all out to fight to the death. The swollen water ball suddenly shrank the moment the arm blades pierced it, and then it expanded again. A soft but irresistible force pushed the huge body of the metal monster back more than 10 meters. Dense bullets rang through the forest. Firmament took a step forward with the heavy sword in his hand, the sword of Holy Path from the Wang family of Beihai. Without a sound, the whole forest became a world of pure lightning and water. The condensed sword intent instantly burst out in the most thorough and crazy way. This was a sword that completely disregarded any consequences. It pressed forward and swept everything in its path. The air was clearly twisted into ripples visible to the naked eye. With the lightning and water, the completely explosive power spread in all directions with Firmament as the center. Lightning shot and water filled the air. In the surging sword intent, the armor on the metal monster's body gradually deformed, and his body kept retreating. The air ripples full of water and lightning hit him again and then swept into the distance, destroying everything around him. After a moment that seemed to last for an eternity, everything in the area of hundreds of meters around Firmament turned into dust. All the grass and trees had completely disappeared. The ground mixed with the rain became unprecedentedly smooth and flat. Standing on the mirror-like ground, Firmament took another step forward. Blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes became more and more excited. He raised the huge sword slightly, and the second sword strike was about to cut the sky and the earth. In his sight, the armor of the metal monster, who had retreated dozens of meters, had deformed slightly, and the red light flashed in his eyes. Firmament moved forward. He also took a step forward. No fear, no pain, no fatigue. This was the highest achievement of East Island in transforming people, and also the most terrifying war machine. Wang Shengxiao had already turned around and retreated with black pupil. They had experienced similar scenes several times in 5 days. In terms of strength, the metal monster with the codename Captain was definitely no match for Firmament. But it was one thing to beat him, and it was another thing to kill him. Captain, who was wrapped in armor, didn't need anything at all. Even if Firmament, a superior a half-step to invincible realm, attacked with all his strength, he could only deform the armor. The armor was made of special alloy, and with some anti-impact materials, Captain in this state could be said to be a real combination of attack and defense. Under the invincible realm, there were many people who could defeat him, but almost no one could kill him in a short time. He was a pure monster. After Wang Shengxiao went missing, Firmament and Black Pupil went to East Island to rescue him. But no one expected that Wang Shengxiao met this monster. The two met Wang Shengxiao 5 days ago, and the change was not big. Before, Wang Shengxiao was being hunted alone, but now, the three of them were being hunted together. Firmament and Black Pupil brought a lot of supplies and news from Zhongzhou State. After all, Firmament was a superior a half-step to invincible realm. Even if he couldn't kill Captain, his extreme outbursts could completely suppress him and consume most of his energy. So, after the three of them gathered together, facing Captain's pursuit, there was no danger. But being chased for hundreds of kilometers, even if there was no danger, it was still a pain in the ass. The heavy sword blade was raised. Firmament didn't look back, but his sharp eyes were filled with extreme determination. They were less than 50 kilometers away from Changdao. After entering Changdao, they could gather with the elites of Zhongzhou State as soon as possible. Under normal circumstances, the 50 kilometers was enough for Captain to replenish his energy and chase again. But now Firmament calmly took a deep breath. He drew back his arm that was holding the sword. Looking at Captain who was rushing toward him again, he suddenly raised his arm and held the sword to the sky. Boom! The air was shaking crazily, and the loud sound was like thunder, echoing fiercely in the walls of the air. The rolling thunder spread through the whole forest. A ball of dazzling lightning lit up on the blade of the giant sword and rushed to the sky. The amazing lightning was blooming in the high sky. For a moment, the sky was completely mysterious and dangerous deep blue. There was no lightning in the air, or in other words, the whole space turned into lightning. The deep blue space that filled everyone's sight fell rapidly from the high sky, as if the whole sky was directly pressed down, with a strong sense of destruction. The sword that destroyed the world. The sword that shook the world. Although this strike was still in the scope of a half-step to invincible realm, it was infinitely close to the mysterious invincible realm. All his physical strength was almost sucked out in an instant. All his physical strength, all his sword intent, and the ultimate pseudo-domain. Firmament's eyes became crazy and scarlet, and thick blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. The sword strike that was almost beyond his ability didn't cover the captain's huge body, but he was already seriously injured. The man and the sword became one, and the sword became one with heaven and earth. Heavenly sword of the Wang family of Beihai. The captain's movements suddenly stopped. He raised his head with a rigid expression, looking at the rapidly falling deep blue sky, a bit hesitant. Divine wind. Glacier. Tide. Defense. Hibernation. The moment when the deep blue sky was about to cover the captain with the amazing sword light, a cold roar suddenly rang out. The captain's scarlet eyes and his armor suddenly lit up. Without hesitation, he squatted down his huge body, curled up, and turned himself into a huge ball. The sword light suddenly arrived and completely covered the captain's curled-up body. The earth shook and the mountains shook. The ground that was as smooth as a mirror suddenly cracked, and countless dense cracks appeared on the ground. A big hole with a diameter of nearly 20 meters appeared where the captain was, and his whole body had disappeared from the ground, and he was blasted into the ground. Puff! Chapter 189. There's one more chapter ahead. 2 chapters in a row. Firmament's expression was still calm, but there was bitterness in his eyes, and even the will to die. No one knew better than him how powerful the sword strike, that was infinitely close to the invincible realm was. Under normal circumstances, that sword strike couldn't kill Captain, but the sword he forcibly drove at the cost of being seriously injured was enough to make Captain use up all his energy, and even make his damage reach more than 50%. Once this sword strike was used, Captain would not be able to chase after them in the future, and he could even directly withdraw from the Battle of Changdao this time. But at the most critical moment, someone modified Captain's order and forced him to enter the dormant state with the strongest defense. In this state, not to mention the damage of Captain, the most important thing was that the person who modified Captain's order was now approaching this battlefield quickly. After days of hunting, Captain was finally not alone, and he had a helper. The person who could control Captain's order, even if it was temporary, must have a high status and strength. Captain was unable to fight anymore, but with a strong enemy on the side, he could only continue to escape. Oh, Firmament! A burst of playful and surprised laughter suddenly sounded in the air. 2 figures suddenly appeared in front of Wang Shengxiao, and the other 2. Long time no see. I'm really surprised to see you here. Ah, and Ms. Black Pupil. What a surprise. Well, Mr. Wang Shengxiao's strength also surprised me. You're indeed the young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. Haha, you 3 look a little embarrassed. If you don't mind, I plan to invite you to Dongdu as guests. I wonder if you have any objections? The lightning fell and dissipated. 2 middle-aged men who looked exactly the same appeared in front of the 3 at the same time. They were 2 extremely handsome men. The weirdest thing was that both of them had waist-length hair and wore kimonos, looking old and gloomy. At this moment, the 2 of them blocked in front of Wang Shengxiao. One of them was smiling, and the other looked gloomy. Tide Glacier. Firmament sighed and said blandly, "Your duty doesn't seem to be to deal with the conflicts in the dark world, does it?" Tides, glaciers. These two experts, who used to be famous in the dark world, could be said to be unknown now. They were also twins, but in today's dark world, the most famous pair of twins was Ice Crystal and Frost Sword of Kunlun City. As for Tide and Glacier, who had already withdrawn from the dark world, no one remembered them. However, Firmament knew their origins. They were the former giants of the Divine Wind Force. 10 years ago, they were the left and right commanders of the Divine Wind Force, the second and the third in the Special Warfare Center of East Island. But about 8 years ago, after the two failed to reach the invincible realm before the age of 40, they were both disheartened. They left the dark world and went to the East Island Imperial Palace. They were now the left and right guards of the Mikado. The reason why Firmament knew them was that when the Mikado of East Island visited Beihai Province a few years ago, they met and Wang Tianzong told him about the origin of the brothers, two half-step invincible realm experts. Furthermore, they were twin brothers who shared the same thoughts. The corners of Firmament's mouth became more and more bitter. Even in his heyday, he might be able to suppress one of them, but when the two of them joined hands, he was absolutely no match for them. And now he was seriously injured and couldn't even hold one of them back. This is East Island. Tide chuckled and said softly with a smile on his face, "Anything we think is necessary is within our scope of responsibility." Including bullying the weak and catching a junior? The captain of the Kusanagi force hunted him down for half a month without any result, and then you two came here. You really made East Island proud. Firmament said in a mocking tone. Although the captain still has a human mind, in the process of transformation, the sharpness of his mind will inevitably decline. Now he's very stiff. Tide sighed and said with a smile, "East Island's current scientific and technological power is far less than that of Zhongzhou State. If we could also develop something like the Four Spirits armor, we would also choose a real person to lead the Kusanagi force. But unfortunately, we can't do that." Firmament narrowed his eyes, forcibly suppressed his serious injury, and started to increase his strength desperately. Tide didn't seem to mind his dying struggle. He continued, "In fact, if time permits, we don't mind if the captain continues to play with Mr. Wang Shengshao. Anyway, he will be caught sooner or later. But now time doesn't permit it, and neither does the situation. You three are too close to Changdao, so we came here. His Majesty the Mikado thinks it's not suitable for you three to go to East Island now. On the contrary, the Imperial Palace is the most suitable place for you. Mr. Wang Shengshao is a very important person, we think. He's not the only important one. Gu Hanshan is also uncontactable. You've made a lot of secret deals with Kunlun City in recent years, haven't you? Catching him can also bring you greater benefits. And Ice Crystal Frost Sword has now arrived in East Island. Don't you want to meet him?" Firmament calmly interrupted Tide's words. "Firmament, are you insulting us? Ice Crystal Frost Sword? What the hell is that?" Before Tide could say anything, Glacier, who had a cold expression on his face, took a step forward and spoke in an eerie voice. He wasn't tall, and he was wearing a kimono. His waist-length hair made him look even shorter. However, as he walked forward, an extremely eerie killing intent gushed out from him, causing people to subconsciously ignore the fact that he wasn't tall enough. Firmament smiled and didn't say anything. He held the sword hilt tighter and tighter. The sword energy circulated around him, and became more and more obvious. He knew why Glacier was so angry. Ice Crystal Frost Sword was famous in the Dark World now, but in fact, a few years ago, the Dark World didn't have this name. At that time, they called it Ice Crystal Sword Master and Ice Frost Sword Master. The word Sword Master had a very special meaning for the Dark World of Zhongzhou State, because this word had always belonged to Mount Shu in the past hundreds of years. Ice Crystal Frost Sword from Kunlun City called themselves Sword Master, which was obviously a provocation to Mount Shu. As for whether Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, planned it or not, no one knew. Because before the series of conspiracies could be carried out, Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, went straight to Kunlun City and challenged the twin brothers who were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm at that time. After that battle, the two sword masters became the Ice Crystal Frost Sword of today. Glacier and Tide were both figures of the half-step invincible realm, and they thought highly of themselves. They didn't think they were inferior to Wei Kunlun. He compared Wei Kunlun's defeated opponents with them, which showed his disdain. Ice Crystal Frost Sword is not worthy for us to intercept. Only people like you, Firmament, and young heavenly sons like Mr. Wang Shengxiao are worthy for us to come here. Oh, and Ms. Black Pupil, your eyes are so charming. Maybe they will be more beautiful if we dig them out. What do you think? Tide chuckled and squinted his eyes. He didn't look at Firmament or Black Pupil anymore. His eyes fell on Wang Shengxiao, who looked calm. Well, I think we don't have to waste time. Young Master Wang, are you going back with us? Or are you going to resist? No matter what choice you make, we are very welcome. I can go wherever I want. Now, I want to go to Changdao. Wang Shengxiao said blandly, make way. Good spirit. Tide gave him a thumbs up and praised sincerely. It's a pity that your strength is too low, and Firmament is seriously injured. What capital do you have to resist us? Ms. Black Pupil? She's not enough, far from enough. You can try. Wang Shengxiao suddenly reached out his hand and took the giant sword from Firmament's hand, smiling more and more gently. That's not a good idea. Tide shook his head and said seriously, I advise you not to resist. Today we are here. No matter what, you have to go with us. No one can stop us. He really didn't want to fight with Wang Shengxiao. If there was an accident in the battle, more than one heir of the Wang family of Beihai would be killed or injured. For East Island, it meant tens of thousands of square kilometers of land rented by the royal family, which originally belonged to East Island. They can't stop you, but what about me? A soft and cold voice suddenly rang out from afar. A white dot suddenly appeared in the distance. When the voice rang out, the person was still far away, but as the voice fell, he had already appeared next to Wang Shengxiao. He was dressed in white, with an evil face and a cold temperament. A vague but deadly danger suddenly spread in the forest. It was as thin as a needle, but extremely sharp. Tide's pupils suddenly contracted. He stared at the man in white who suddenly appeared in front of him and said coldly, Who are you? My name is Daybreak. The man in white narrowed his eyes and looked playfully at Tide and Glacier, who looked like they were facing a formidable enemy. He said softly, You are no match for me, so they should go back to Changdao with me. Do you have a problem with that? Tide sneered and was about to say something. Daybreak said meaningfully again, A word of advice. If you say something, you will die. The night wind blew. Daybreak's soft tone revealed an indescribable weirdness and coldness, which made people's scalps numb. Are you friends? Tide stared at Daybreak and asked. He had never heard of the code name Daybreak, but he suddenly appeared here, and the vague sense of danger kept stimulating his skin all over. Tide was sure that this man in white with a weird background was at least a superior of the half-step invincible realm. And even if he was a superior of the half-step invincible realm, he should be a top-notch superior. For example, Azure Dragon Gongsun Chi of Zhongzhou State, Tribulation of Sai City, Saint of Samsara Palace, Firmament of the Wang family of Beihai. They were no match for such a person alone. But once they joined hands, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose. Tide clenched his fist, and the killing intent flashed in his eyes. No. Daybreak shook his head with a smile, but his eyes drifted for a moment. He said blandly, I was entrusted by someone. Someone asked me to bring them back to East Island safely. Who is it? Before Tide opened his mouth, Wang Shengxiao and Black Pupil had asked in unison. Samsara. Daybreak didn't seem to be on guard against a pair of twin brothers of the half-step invincible realm. He looked back at Wang Shengxiao with a smile and said in a soft tone, To be exact, it should be Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Wang Shengxiao just looked weird. But Black Pupil and Firmament's faces suddenly changed. Vaguely, they knew that there seemed to be another knot between Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai. Everyone had a reason to save the elites of Zhongzhou State who were in East Island, except for Li Tianlan. Oh. Li Tianlan, Tide nodded. He's a very important person. In fact, if he wasn't in Changdao, maybe we would have done something to him. Daybreak couldn't help laughing. In the angry eyes of Tide and Glacier, his expression seemed to be a little sympathetic. You two have good strength, but you can't do anything to him. Really? You? Glacier said coldly. A bolt of lightning had already begun to spread out from his palm. The lightning curled around him, illuminating his entire body with a dark blue color. Of course, not just me. Daybreak looked at Tide and Glacier meaningfully and said softly, "Your alertness is too poor. Didn't anyone tell you to pay attention to your back all the time?" Behind. Tide's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. Glacier had already turned his head around to take a quick glance. He just glanced back and turned around. Then his body shook and he suddenly froze on the spot. About 2 or 3 seconds later, he suddenly turned around again and looked behind him, with an incredible shock on his face. Tide, who had sensed that something was wrong, felt his heart gradually sink. He suddenly pulled Glacier, and the two brothers retreated dozens of meters away. Then they turned around. In an instant, Tide's eyes widened as he stared behind him, dumbfounded as if he had seen a ghost. In the dark forest, the rain was messy, and the wind was howling. Everything in the forest was vague and indistinct. Behind the two of them, about 100 meters away, shadows slowly walked out of the blurry darkness one after another. They were in groups. Little by little, the fire lit up, and the hot temperature evaporated the rain curtain and baked the forest. Tide's face was pale, and he felt a little cold all over. The figures in his sight were all superiors of the fire-flaming realm. In the darkness, there were flames mixed and connected, and the figures gathered together. Chapter 190. Once the chaos started, it obviously wouldn't stop in a short time. More and more superiors entered Changdao from different channels. The surprise attack on the outer defense line of Changdao on the first day wasn't the end. On the contrary, it was just a prelude. With the arrival of a large number of superiors from the Dark World, there were fights almost every day on the edge of Changdao. All the dark superpowers seemed to have reached a tacit agreement. Let East Island bleed first. Even if a large number of elites from East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou State. Even all the dark superpowers in the world started to gather in Changdao. But it was undeniable that this was still East Island's home ground. In a face-to-face battle, not to mention whether all the superpowers could unite, even if all of them gathered together, they might not be East Island's match. At the very least, even if they won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory, and every superpower would suffer heavy losses, which no one was willing to accept. Right now, most of the elites of East Island gathered in Changdao and set up defense lines around Changdao. How could the superpowers let go of such an obvious target? Almost at the same time, everyone started to attack the special warfare defense line around Changdao again and again. The intensive and frequent raids didn't even give East Island a chance to reorganize. The result of being tired of dealing with them was a real bloodbath and corpses everywhere. On the last day of June, the third day after Li Tianlan woke up, East Island, which had been holding the defense line, finally began to recognize the reality. The defense lines around them all withdrew into the interior of Changdao. The elites of East Island, who had been fighting with the superpowers of the Dark World for a long time, had started to gather and reorganize. Changdao, which had been fighting for many days, seemed to have calmed down, but the undercurrents were getting more turbulent inside. The elites of Zhongzhou State finally entered Changdao within 72 hours after Li Tianlan woke up, and they had settled down through the special channel of Samsara. Led by the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, Gong Sunqi, 600 elites of Zhongzhou State had also arrived in Changdao. East Island might have noticed it, or maybe not. But from the beginning to the end, since the dark superpowers entered Changdao, East Island had been silent. The silent undercurrent was surging in Changdao. Every minute and every second, the city seemed to become more and more depressed. A great battle was imminent, and it could erupt at any moment. The most oppressive and peaceful period before the great battle also became the rarest time for all parties to prepare. The underground organizations seized the time to mobilize their manpower and personally get into the situation to understand the current situation. The elites of Zhongzhou State were recuperating. The first batch of Zhongzhou state elites that entered East Island had nearly 2,000 people. After all of them arrived in Changdao, including the second batch of 600 elites, the total number of people was still nearly 2,000, and a lot of them were wounded, which showed how fierce the journey was. East Island, on the other hand, was integrating resources and collecting intelligence. There was no doubt that East Island had the most things to do, but they could do it with the power of the whole country, so they wouldn't be too slow. In the current situation, no matter which side was ready for the war, the Battle of Changdao that the whole dark world was looking forward to would break out completely. Therefore, everyone was very anxious. Li Tianlan was in a hurry to recover. Since he entered Changdao, this could be said to be the most peaceful period. After his accumulated injuries broke out completely in the Battle of Zhongjing, he had fallen into an unprecedentedly weak state. It had been nearly a week since the Battle of Zhongjing. Many wounds on Li Tianlan's body had healed, but the recovery speed of his internal injuries wasn't ideal. The huge vitality in the immortality potion could make him recover much faster than others. Together with the daily routine treatment, he only recovered less than half of his injuries in nearly a week. Li Tianlan was very clear about his current injuries. If he wanted to recover completely, it would take at least half a month, or even 20 days. The general trend couldn't be changed by his will. Now Li Tianlan could only hope that the final battle could come later, the later the better. The rainstorm that swept the whole of East Island hit Changdao 3 days ago. The crazy rain and the fierce wind raged between heaven and earth. It was midsummer, but there was no heat, so the whole courtyard was slightly cold and cool. In the antique pavilion, Li Tianlan stood quietly, looking down at the clear pool that was disturbed by the rain, with a gentle and calm expression. This was the only water feature in this courtyard. In front of the door of the villa in the center of the courtyard, there was a pool with a diameter of about 20 or 30 meters. The pool was deep, and there were hundreds of ornamental fish of different colors inside. The rainstorm fell messily in the clear pool, and the fish under the water kept surfacing and diving. The whole pool was shaking, full of ripples, but it couldn't turn over, just like Li Tianlan's ambition and desire that couldn't be stopped. The whistling wind took away the last remaining warmth in the pavilion. Li Tianlan, who wore a thin windbreaker, wrapped the lapels of his clothes and then stopped moving. In front of him was the pool, and behind him were tables and chairs. There was a pot of tea on the light brown marble table, and a few teacups were scattered on the table. There were a lot of cigarette butts in the ashtray in the middle. It seemed that not long ago, many people had a conversation in the pavilion. But no one knew how long the conversation had ended. The smoke in the pavilion drifted away, and the tea was completely cold. Li Tianlan stood quietly. His heart was restless with the wind and rain, but he looked calmer and gentler on the surface. Another group of fish jumped out of the water, and then fell back down. Li Tianlan's eyes, which were very focused most of the time, gradually became unfocused, as if he was in a trance. For the past few days, he had been healing his wounds, and he was also waiting for the opportunity that he didn't know would appear. It had been almost a month since he came to East Island. Fighting, blood, corpses, storms, fires, and thunder filled Li Tianlan's mind. But Li Tianlan still didn't understand the meaning of all this. Zhongzhou State and Samsara cooperated, and this plan could be described as a national effort, and they were still investing. East Island's special warfare elites were killed and injured, and Zhongzhou State also paid a big price. But what was the meaning behind all these battles? They killed people, but this was East Island. If East Island didn't perish, what was the point of killing some special warfare elites? Zhongzhou State and Samsara wanted the right to speak in the dark world of East Island. But now, no matter how he looked at it, Li Tianlan didn't see any possibility of yielding. Why did Zhongzhou State think that after this battle, these resources and territories of East Island would belong to them? Horsewoman said he would see the answer soon. But Li Tianlan still had no clue. His mind was a little messy. Li Tianlan's imagination ran wild, and his eyes became more and more unfocused. The storm hit Changdao and the pool in front of him. The weather was always gloomy and dark. Time seemed to stay still, and it was already half the afternoon. At a certain moment, Li Tianlan, who was standing quietly, suddenly focused his eyes. At the same time, a gentle and smiling voice rang out. This place is nice. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered, and he turned around and said blandly, "It's really nice. You can live here if you like." This yard was the central area of the whole clubhouse. It was built in the mountains, and the clubhouse surrounded by mountains was quiet. In this well-protected yard, the quiet atmosphere was aloof from the world. Up close, there were lush grass, trees, and clear water. From afar, there were undulating mountains. This so-called top-end clubhouse in Changdao did have a kind of charm and style that made people forget the vulgar. This yard was arranged by Duke, and Saint didn't object when he saw it. Living in the most distinguished yard in this clubhouse, Samsara wanted to express something simple and complicated. After the elites of Zhongzhou state arrived in Changdao, Li Tianlan vaguely understood some subtle meanings. There was only one villa in the yard, but Li Tianlan didn't live alone. Several people from East Emperor Palace and Dongqing Rushi lived here for a few days. But most of the time, they were either meditating or resting and healing. They didn't have much time to talk. It was almost the same as if he was alone. "Forget it for me." The uninvited visitor smiled, and there was a kind of sincere kindness in his smile, which made it hard to tell whether he was sincere or not. "This is what Samsara did to elevate your status. What's the point of me living here?" And he paused, and the smile on his handsome and gentle face was still sincere. He said softly, "If I live here, aren't you afraid that I'll sneak attack and kill you when you're meditating?" "Will you?" Li Tianlan's tone became calmer. "Why not?" Wang Shengxiao, who didn't hold an umbrella but was still dry and clean, walked into the pavilion. He smiled softly and said, "From the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai and myself, if I want to kill you, I don't even need to find a reason, because there are too many reasons." Li Tianlan looked at him with a faint smile, but his eyes were unfathomable and dead. "Wang Shengxiao broke through the siege and came to the club yesterday. Firmament and Black Pupil, who were seriously injured, followed him." Li Tianlan hadn't seen any of them, but he roughly understood what was going on. Samsara rescued the three of them at the most critical moment, through the special channel of its partners. In this respect, the three of them all owed Li Tianlan a big favor, or even a life-saving favor. Wang Shengxiao didn't meet Li Tianlan immediately, but he didn't delay too long. After arriving last night and taking a quick rest, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai rushed here as soon as possible. Li Tianlan didn't say a word. He just quietly looked into Wang Shengxiao's eyes. Wang Shengxiao was in a very good state of mind. His face was a little pale, but his eyes were full of energy. He wore a very simple and clean light-colored suit, and carried a long box in his hand. Although he said he wanted to kill him, he didn't mean to do it at all. "And if I want to kill you, maybe I've already done it?" Wang Shengxiao paused for a while, and said meaningfully, "I'm still alive." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Facing Wang Shengxiao, his mind was actually a little complicated. But the conversation in this soft voice was not like a meeting between a brother-in-law and his brother-in-law. Li Tianlan, who had recognized the reality, naturally regarded Wang Shengxiao as an opponent, even an enemy. "As long as I'm alive, I'll know what you've done sooner or later." "Yes, you're still alive." Wang Shengxiao sighed softly, and his tone seemed a little complicated and weird. "To be honest, this is what surprises me the most. You're still alive, and you saved me once. Is this your kindness to the Wang family of Beihai?" Li Tianlan shook his head expressionlessly and said coldly, "You're Yuetong's brother." Wang Shengxiao looked at Li Tianlan in silence for a long time. After a long time, he handed the box in his hand to Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "There's a little misunderstanding between us. This is my compensation." "Nice stuff." Li Tianlan was a little confused. He didn't know what misunderstanding could there be between him and Wang Shengxiao. He took the box and opened it. An extremely ferocious and weird sniper rifle suddenly appeared in the box. The ferocious body of the gun showed a different kind of delicacy. It was black all over, faintly exuding a kind of scorching and death aura. It looked very familiar. Li Tianlan's pupils shrank. In an instant, cold and sharp killing intent was suddenly released from his body. "Good gun." He was silent for a while and said in a cold tone, "Of course it was a good gun, and it was a good gun that had almost killed him several times." Grim smile. The grim smile in Heavenly Calamity's hand. For a moment, all kinds of thoughts popped up in Li Tianlan's mind. This is Heavenly Calamity's apology, Wang Shengxiao said softly. I can fully represent his position. I hope the grievances between you can be resolved for the time being. Take this gun as a gift from him. Heavenly Calamity, who ranked 5th on the killer list in the Dark World, was from the Wang family of Beihai? The Wang family of Beihai was really full of experts. Li Tianlan sneered in his heart, but his eyes grew colder. He didn't ask about the specific relationship between Heavenly Calamity and the Wang family of Beihai. Some questions were not suitable to be asked. Sometimes, not asking could be considered as having some leeway. He touched the gun casually and directly returned the box to Wang Shengxiao. He said with a smile, "This gun is very powerful. I've seen it myself. But it's too expensive for me to accept. Give it back to him for me." Wang Shengxiao was obviously stunned for a moment. He looked at Li Tianlan's smiling face seriously, and then at his hand. Li Tianlan's expression didn't change at all. "Do you know what you're refusing?" Wang Shengxiao looked at Li Tianlan and asked in a serious tone. Li Tianlan's words and actions were equivalent to refusing the reconciliation of the Wang family of Beihai. How many years has it been since something like this happened? He wants to kill me. Li Tianlan's expression was calm. He smiled and said softly, "I'll kill whoever wants to kill me. One gun is not enough. It's not impossible to solve this. I want Heavenly Calamity's head. If he's dead, I'll pretend that this never happened." Looking at Wang Shengxiao's eyes that suddenly became cold, Li Tianlan continued, "Samsara can also pretend that nothing happened." A smile gradually appeared on the corner of Wang Shengxiao's mouth. His tone seemed to be mixed with cold wind, piercing to the bone. The Wang family of Beihai doesn't accept coercion. Besides, Samsara may not be able to protect you in everything. Li Tianlan agreed and said straightforwardly, "We don't see eye to eye. That's it." He turned around and walked directly out of the pavilion. Decisive, straightforward, and indifferent. Wait. The corner of Wang Shengxiao's eyes suddenly jumped. He gritted his teeth. Obviously, such a scene was somewhat embarrassing for the Wang family of Beihai, which had always been strong. Wang Shengxiao's expression was also a little unnatural. But thinking of Li Tianlan's life-saving grace, he took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Can't this be discussed?" Li Tianlan's footsteps paused slightly. "Yes," he said indifferently. "Heavenly Calamity killed me twice. I don't want his broken spear. Either he dies, or he works for me for 2 years. This price is really high," Wang Shengxiao mocked. Heavenly Calamity was a super killer ranked 5th on the killer list. Everyone knew how long it would take for him to work for 2 years. At least this price. Li Tianlan and his East Emperor Palace were absolutely unable to pay for it at present. Li Tianlan turned around and looked at Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao took a deep breath and suddenly said calmly, "It's not me who wants to kill you this time. Someone else hired Heavenly Calamity, but he reported it to the Wang family of Beihai. To be exact, he told me. I know about it and I acquiesced." Li Tianlan still didn't say a word. "I didn't expect you to save me." Wang Shengxiao shook his head and said with a self-mocking smile, "I'm in the wrong in this matter. I'll talk to him about Heavenly Calamity. As for the result, I can't guarantee." He took out a folded A4 paper from his arms and handed it to Li Tianlan. "This is my compensation. It's the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai against the way of heaven. Under the invincible realm, it can temporarily improve one's combat capability by consuming one's potential. It's not a good thing, but it's very rare in the outside world. I think it should be useful to you." Li Tianlan's expression was still calm, even in the face of a core unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. And it was the core unique skill that was most useful to him. His expression didn't change at all. He thought about it and reached out to take it. "You and I are even. My life is not so cheap," Wang Shengxiao said flatly. "And your life is also valuable. You saved me today. If you lose to me in the future, I'll spare your life." Li Tianlan sneered. "I saved you because of Yuetong. That's all. You and I are even today. If I really lose in the future, I don't need you to spare my life. Because if I win, I won't spare you. So do what you have to do. You'd rather die than be defeated? There was a hint of playfulness in Wang Shengxiao's smile. Are you so confident? Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at the wind and rain outside the window. He said calmly, I can't be defeated in my life. Wang Shengxiao took a deep look at him and turned to leave the pavilion. Behind him, Li Tianlan tore the paper that recorded the way of heaven into pieces and threw it into the pool. He said flatly, what's the point? After the reconciliation, enemies were still enemies after all. Why is it pointless? An elegant and calm voice suddenly rang out behind him. Chapter 191. The voice was elegant and peaceful, passing through the hustle and bustle of the wind and rain, with a kind of charm that calmed all the chaos. The rainstorm cleared the pond, but it suddenly quieted down in the pavilion. The paper fragments that recorded the unique skills of the Wang family flew to every corner of the courtyard with the wind. Li Tianlan turned around calmly and looked at the figure that quietly appeared in the pavilion. He asked with slight confusion, You are? The man who appeared alone in front of Li Tianlan should be regarded as a young man, no more than 40 years old at most. He had very capable short hair and tight skin. His appearance was not particularly handsome, but he had a strong sense of firmness and toughness. Judging from his appearance, people would believe that he was in his 20s, but his eyes quietly revealed something else. It was a pair of eyes that was completely opposite to his temperament. They were gentle and soft, without any sharpness, but full of hardships. A very special man, and also a very contradictory man. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at his slightly smiling face, remaining calm and collected. From the first time he saw him, Li Tianlan didn't know why he thought of Dongqing Wudi. They were vaguely similar, but slightly different. Every move of the Zhongzhou state god of massacre carried a kind of soul-shaking killing intent, which was extremely sharp. In Li Tianlan's eyes, the marshal of the Dongqing clan was full of killing intent and majestic momentum. But his momentum was so strong that the higher he went, the narrower the pattern of martial arts became, so that there was no hope of entering the invincible realm. The man in front of him, not to mention military talent, could even be regarded as an upgraded version of Dongqing Wudi in martial arts. He was gentle and elegant. He sat there quietly without any killing intent, but the whole courtyard was full of killing intent. His momentum was restrained, and the pattern was grand. There was a vague trend of entering the invincible realm. Since Li Tianlan entered the secular world, he had only seen this kind of extremely perfect and natural feeling in a few people. Excluding Wang Tianzong, who had entered the invincible realm, the first one was naturally Tribulation. Tribulation's martial arts path was unprecedented. After the completion of martial arts, he did not enter the invincible realm, so he could only rely on himself to continue to explore. The second one was Saint of Samsara. It was basically a matter of time for him to enter the invincible realm. The third one was the one in front of him. In terms of the perfection of martial arts momentum, he gave Li Tianlan the feeling that he was even slightly above Tribulation and Saint. An expert of the invincible realm? Li Tianlan's heart shook, but he looked calmer on the surface. A man dressed in casual clothes casually sat on the stone table. With a slight wave of his hand, a flame lit up and the tea on the table was instantly heated up. Did you have a guest before? And the boy from the Wang family of Beihai, you are a busy man now. Do you treat everyone who comes to see you like this? He narrowed his eyes and chuckled. Vigilant on guard, and ready to strike at any time? Sir is different from them. Li Tianlan stood where he was and said calmly, I don't think there's anything here that's worth the patronage of an invincible realm expert. The man with a gentle aura was obviously stunned. A trace of sadness flashed across his eyes, and then he smiled and said, I'm not an invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan was both embarrassed and confused. The consummation of martial arts was naturally his personal feeling, which was not authoritative. But the Li family, which had produced 9 generations of invincible realm experts, should not be wrong to have some feelings. Why, the man seemed to know what Li Tianlan was thinking. He shook his head and said calmly, I had a great chance to enter the invincible realm, but I was injured once, and my martial arts path was broken. He lowered his eyelids, and a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. Li Tianlan nodded without too much curiosity. The injury could make a genius cut off his invincible realm path, and he knew there must be a lot of secrets. He looked at the man in front of him and asked again, "Then you are?" Gong Sun Qi. The man's tone was indifferent and even elegant. Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows in awe and even a little flattered. He was one of the 4 captains of the most powerful and mysterious terracotta army in Zhongzhou State, and he was also the first captain. He was currently recognized as the strongest expert under the invincible realm in the dark world. He was absolutely neutral and did not interfere in anything inside Zhongzhou State. He was always fighting against the outside world. Outside the dark world, he was unknown, whether he was alive or dead. He was a real hero. Li Tianlan knew that Gong Sun Qi was living in the club now, but he didn't think he could have any connection with this kind of person. One was absolutely neutral, and the other was entangled with gratitude and hatred. Their positions were not opposite, but they were diametrically opposite. The biggest connection between them was probably hidden in the same club. At least before just now, Li Tianlan had never thought that Gong Sun Qi would specifically look for him. It was not logical at all. General Gongsun. Li Tianlan slightly relaxed his body and sat on the stone bench. But after calling him, he really didn't know what to say to the Azure Dragon hidden in the dark, so he just came straight to the point. "General, what can I do for you?" Back to the question just now. Gong Sun Qi sat in a very relaxed way and said with a smile, "I came earlier, so I heard the latter part of your conversation with Wang Shengxiao. To be honest, I think he is very sincere. Why do you think it doesn't make sense?" He paused, looked at Li Tianlan meaningfully and said softly, "Are you hostile to the Wang family of Beihai?" Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat, but his expression was still calm. Hostile to the Wang family of Beihai? Whether there was or not, it was not a topic that could be told to outsiders. He lowered his head. And it was not a matter of whether he was hostile to the Wang family of Beihai, but whether the Wang family of Beihai had the intention to kill him. This time, Wang Shengxiao could acquiesce that Heavenly Calamity accepted the task to kill him. What would happen next time? Such a reconciliation seemed to be sincere, but in fact, it was to stabilize him. In fact, it was of no use. The next time the Wang family of Beihai thought he deserved to die, they would not give in because of today's reconciliation. So when facing Wang Shengxiao just now, whether Li Tianlan compromised or was tough, he would not change the position of the Wang family of Beihai. "General Gongsun, in fact this question of yours is also meaningless." Li Tianlan finally opened his mouth, speaking in a very slow and cautious tone. "It is meaningful." Gong Sun Qi looked at Li Tianlan, and a trace of paranoia flashed in his eyes, which had always been gentle and calm. The hidden killing intent in all directions was slowly condensing. For a moment, the sound of rain and wind faded away, and the whole pavilion was quiet. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, against the way of heaven, should be the unique skill you need the most now, right? It can temporarily improve the combat capability of a whole realm. Although the price is not small, it can save your life at a critical moment. Isn't it meaningful for you? Li Tianlan was silent. Against the way of heaven was indeed the unique skill he needed the most. A unique skill that could help him enter the thunder-shocking realm. Even if it was only one strike, was enough for Li Tianlan to face most situations with confidence. But Wang Shengxiao's movements were a little slow. The current against the way of heaven was completely a piece of waste paper for him. At most, it could play a little role in concealment. Moreover, he was actually in the ice-condensing realm, and now it was already his limit to control the strength of the fire-flaming realm. If he used against the way of heaven again in the fire-flaming realm, even if the price was smaller than the price he paid to restore the thunder-shocking realm, how much smaller could it be? Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously and looked at Gong Sun Qi, who seemed to be quietly drinking tea in front of him. Vaguely, he seemed to be able to feel the storm brewing in Gong Sun Qi's heart. A storm far more turbulent than today's storm. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat, But he said calmly, "But what does it mean to you? Or, if I admit that I'm hostile to the Wang family of Beihai, will you attack me?" The corner of his mouth twitched, and there was an obvious mockery in his calmness. "Neutral? Ha! With your identity, it's normal to be hostile to the Wang family of Beihai. I just want to remind you that as long as it's beneficial to you, even if it comes from the enemy, you can still use it. Some persistence is ridiculous in the dark world." Gong Sunqi's tone was indifferent, but under the indifferent appearance, the storm that was about to rise became more and more obvious. "Identity? Identity." Gong Sunqi narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. "Your identity is obviously not a secret, at least in Zhongzhou State. After the battle between Gu Xingyun and the master of Samsara Palace, the speculation about you can basically be confirmed. The successor of the Li family, so now it's not the Wang family of Beihai who wants to kill you the most, but Kunlun City. But after Kunlun City, it's probably the Wang family of Beihai who wants to kill you the most. Boy, I'm afraid you won't have a good time in Zhongzhou State in the future." Li Tianlan's expression was calm. A fire was ignited in his hand, and the blazing light illuminated the already dim pavilion. The tea in the cup became warm again. Li Tianlan took a sip of tea and said expressionlessly, So, when the darkness enveloped the courtyard and the light disappeared, there seemed to be a trace of gloomy killing intent in Gong Sunqi's eyes. He suddenly chuckled and said coldly, "Do you know why I can't enter the invincible realm?" Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. Gong Sunqi just said that the reason why he couldn't enter the invincible realm was that he had been injured once. Was there a secret? Li Tianlan felt a little ridiculous, but he still said subconsciously, "Is it the Wang family of Beihai? Or Kunlun City?" At this point, it was obvious that the two sides were not familiar with each other. But thinking of his identity and position, Li Tianlan could roughly understand the reason why Gong Sunqi was so bold. He smiled bitterly and instinctively didn't want to get involved in this matter. But he had to listen to Gong Sunqi's experience. Someone blocked Gong Sunqi's way. If he entered the invincible realm in the future, would someone also block his way? I don't know. Gong Sunqi's tone was indifferent, as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. There was no anger, no resentment, only a kind of indifference without the slightest emotion. When I was trying to break through the invincible realm in the past, I was ambushed. My preparation in advance was useless, and the ambusher almost succeeded easily. I don't know who did it, but I know what it means for Zhongzhou State once I enter the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was speechless. What did it mean for Zhongzhou State if Gong Sunqi entered the invincible realm? Now Gong Sunqi was neutral. But once he entered the invincible realm, he was likely to become a neutral force. Pure neutrality had no stance, but did neutral forces also have no stance? For example, who could say that Sai City, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, had no stance? In the past, no matter which of the two forces blocked Gong Sunqi's way to the invincible realm, no matter what the original purpose was, the ultimate goal must be to facilitate them to better control the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. From this perspective, such an approach was very similar to Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai's strong opposition to Samsara Palace's entry into Zhongzhou State in recent years, and the purpose was even more similar. Li Tianlan looked at Gong Sunqi in silence, as if deep in thought. "What do you think of Wang Shengxiao?" Gong Sunqi suddenly asked. "He deserves to be a young heavenly son." Li Tianlan seemed to be absent-minded and responded carelessly. Gong Sunqi nodded and said flatly, "I don't like him. Of course, I don't like Gu Hanshan either." Li Tianlan nodded, took out a cigarette, lit it and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid General Gongsun doesn't have a say in the position of Spirit Tortoise, right? It's an internal affair of Zhongzhou State. It's also an internal affair of the Terracotta Army. If my words can't be used as a reference, what's the point of me being the captain, and the first captain at that?" Gong Sunqi looked at Li Tianlan with a smile. "You know this, which means you've been paying attention. I might as well tell you that Jiang Shangyu was seriously injured in East Island for some reason, and now he has secretly sneaked back to Zhongzhou State. He's out of the competition in advance this time. So, if you want Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao to be out of the competition, the Battle of Changdao is a good opportunity. Li Tianlan, how about I find an opportunity to put you on the stage? Your realm is low, but your combat capability is good. The operation space is small, but it's not impossible. Hee hee. Li Tianlan took a drag on the cigarette and looked at Gong Sunqi with a faint smile. Is this a deal? Gong Sunqi used his influence to stop Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao, and as a price he had to stand on the stage to compete with the two young heavenly sons and bear the attacks of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. As for the operation Gong Sunqi mentioned, Li Tianlan completely regarded it as nonsense. Gong Sunqi didn't like Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao, and he might not like Li Tianlan. Putting Li Tianlan on the stage was just to attract fire. When everything was almost done, maybe Gong Sunqi would take out his real candidate. At this moment, Gong Sunqi was still calm, but Li Tianlan vaguely sensed a storm-like ambition. If you say so, then so be it. Gong Sunqi chuckled and said meaningfully, Li Tianlan, don't think too highly of neutrality. The Terracotta Army is indeed neutral, but such neutrality is required by the higher-ups, not something we are willing to keep silent about. This is the rule. Do you understand? As for some things outside the rule, as long as we don't go too far like Jiangshan, the higher-ups won't care too much about it. In the night rain, his voice seemed to have an indescribable temptation. If this cooperation goes well, I'm afraid there will be many opportunities for us to cooperate in the future. You should consider my proposal. Sorry. Li Tianlan said indifferently. I'm not interested. You're really not interested? Gong Sunqi looked at Li Tianlan with playful eyes. Li Tianlan sneered and said nothing. Not interested? How could it be possible? However, he knew very well that now was not the time for him to be interested in these things. For Gu Hanshan and Wang Shengxiao, the position of the four spirits in Zhongzhou State was the best shortcut to become the god of war in Zhongzhou State. If he competed for this position with his own identity, even if his realm was low and his combat capability was low, it was enough to make the higher-ups consider it seriously, and even cause great vigilance and uneasiness of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai, not to mention whether he could sit in this position or not. Even if he did, it was tantamount to courting death. The current opportunity was indeed good, but the timing was not right. And Li Tianlan glanced at Gong Sunqi. They were neither relatives nor friends, and they had just met for the first time. Why would Gong Sunqi help him? Purely using himself to attract the firepower should be the most appropriate. Not interested, Li Tianlan said flatly. If General Gongsun is here for this, then I'm sorry to disappoint you. He stood up and was about to leave. There's one more thing. Gong Sunqi's expression was calm, and no one could tell whether he was happy or angry, disappointed or not. Li Tianlan frowned slightly and didn't speak. Before I came to East Island, someone asked me to bring you a message. I owed this person a big favor back then, so I had to bring this message, Gong Sunqi said in a low voice. There was supposed to be another young man in this Battle of Changdao, but he was stopped before he left. Although this person is still in Zhongzhou State, the person who stopped him has already arrived in East Island. So be careful. Who? Li Tianlan was baffled. The hint was so vague that he couldn't figure it out at all. I don't know. Gong Sunqi shook his head. I just brought a message. The person didn't say who it was. Why not? Li Tianlan frowned and subconsciously muttered to himself. An inexplicable hint seemed to be kind, but what was the truth? I don't know. Gong Sunqi still shook his head. He seemed to think about it seriously, and then said with some uncertainty, I'm afraid it's hard to say, right? Hard to say? Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and said helplessly. Then who asked you to bring this message to me? General Gongsun can tell me, right? Gong Sunqi let out a low laugh. The space in the pavilion twisted, and his figure had disappeared. His low and soft voice sounded in the air, as if he was still there. Chapter 192. A chapter of more than 7,000 words. The night grew darker and darker. Darkness spread between heaven and earth like dyed ink. In the courtyard without light, There was only wind and rain. The raging wind threw rain into the pavilion. In front of the stone table in the center of the pavilion, Li Tianlan held a teacup in his hand and sat motionless. Gong Sun Chi had been gone for a long time. The tea in front of him had long been cold, but the teacup in Li Tianlan's hand was still warm. The tea in the cup was like boiling magma under the hot temperature. Steam filled the air and water splashed, but he didn't notice it. He just calmly thought about his own things. At this moment, Li Tianlan was different from the madness in the battle, or the gentleness in the normal state. When he was thinking seriously, he was like a statue. He looked lifeless and didn't upgrade at all, but he exuded an almost oppressive solemnity from the inside out. The master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibbing. The final battle with Gu Xingyun on June 15th, the undercurrents between Zhongzhou State and East Island, the looming mysterious force in the dark, and Gong Sun Chi's sudden visit today. Vaguely, for the first time, Li Tianlan felt that he seemed to have become a participant in the general trend. If Gong Sun Chi didn't lie to him, then his identity had been completely exposed now. After returning from East Island, no, even from now on, he would face the hostility from Kunlun City, the looming killing intent from the Wang family of Beihai, and the enemies that could be seen or not, who would suddenly jump out to attack him, or even give him a fatal blow before he had time to attack. What should the Li family do in the future? What should the East Emperor Palace do? Since he entered the secular world, it seemed to be the first time that he seriously thought about the future survival and the future situation. In the past, the superficial conflicts between him and Kunlun City were actually nothing. He killed Lu Xiuwei, offended Gu Yunxia, Yang Mengjiang's inexplicable disappearance, and even killed Gu Changjiang. As long as he could pay enough, these were all things that could be forgiven. But his identity, for Kunlun City and even the Wang family of Beihai, was a major event that could never be ignored. The crisis was imminent, and the looming danger kept stimulating his heart. Li Tianlan instinctively began to think about the situation he would face in the future. Seriously speaking, his current background was actually quite strong. Sai City would be the strongest support behind him. Ning Qianqing was still by his side, and Dongqing Rushi also appeared by his side. Therefore, at present, it seemed that the Dongqing clan was also trustworthy. At least for now, he didn't need to be on guard. The academics had been silent since the decisive battle on the 15th of June, and the request he made to Zhuang Huayang was not met with any difficulties. Most importantly, the chief of the academics had brought Li Wangxing out from the border, which in itself was a kind of support. Although the East Emperor Palace was now a newly established institution, Li Tianlan's military exploits alone were already prominent enough during the trip to East Island. After returning to Zhongzhou State, it was almost certain that the level of the East Emperor Palace would be adjusted upward. This was the most obvious amulet. How effective it could be depended entirely on how much the East Emperor Palace would be upgraded. That was all he had at the moment. As for the Samsara Palace, Li Tianlan could already more and more clearly perceive what the Samsara Palace was secretly planning. His identity was exposed at such an inopportune time. To some extent, it should be the result of making way for the Samsara Palace's plan. Li Tianlan would not resent or blame it. It could be seen that after seeing dawn, out of some premonition, Li Tianlan no longer regarded the Samsara Palace as his own resource. He had a vague feeling that this largest resource might not be of any help to him for a long time in the future. But the support that Sai City, the Dongqing clan, and the academics had tilted to him was enough. The only thing that made Li Tianlan uneasy was that his enemies were also beyond imagination. Not only Kunlun City, but also the Wang family of Beihai. Not to mention how many ferocious fangs were hidden behind his father's treason war. The families of the 120,000 troops who died at the border with his father's treason in that war were a force that made people's scalp numb 20 years later. Li Tianlan was expressionless. It was expected that the road ahead would be difficult, but the thorny situation still gave him a headache. After all, his identity was exposed too early. If he could have another 2 or 3 years, his eyes inadvertently swept a few teacups on the stone table, and he subconsciously shook his head. This was a gift from the Samsara Palace to him, and it could even be said to be the greatest help. a favor from nearly 1,000 special warfare elites of Zhongzhou State. In recent days, Li Tianlan would spare time to meet guests every day. Before the arrival of Wang Shengxiao and Gong Sunqi today, Li Tianlan chatted with several special warfare elites who owed him for saving their lives. However, how to use a favor was actually very subtle. Li Tianlan would not be so naive as to think that they really owed him their lives because he saved them. It was a matter of survival. Under the covetous eyes of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai, it would be enough for him to be satisfied if 1/10 of these nearly 1,000 people would help him at the right time. In the following time, how to carefully weave this hard-won network map had almost become the primary problem that he needed to consider. Survival, development, and rise. These three words were almost the future path of the East Emperor Palace. The wind and rain outside the pavilion were more and more deafening. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became firm, and his heart was dead silent. In the dark villa in front of the pavilion, the lights in the hall lit up for a moment, and then fell silent again. Li Tianlan suddenly came to his senses and got up in the pavilion full of cold night. His figure flickered slightly, and after changing places with his shadow, he had already appeared in front of the villa. The silence of all the members of the East Emperor Palace in recent days was what made Li Tianlan most gratified. His identity was exposed, so naturally he could not hide it from Li Beitian and Ning Qiancheng. Li Beitian made a lot of noise, but then he also became silent. Li Tianlan knew the consequences of his identity being exposed. How could Li Beitian and others not know? But what warmed his heart was that no one at present said that they wanted to quit the East Emperor Palace. Especially Li Beitian and Yi Huayu. Both of them came from Mount Shu, which had nothing to do with Li Tianlan. But they did not say that they wanted to quit. And Mount Shu was also silent now. The awe-inspiring and unyielding sword intent behind this silence was undoubtedly the most admirable thing about Shu Mountain. The cohesion of the East Emperor Palace began to take shape in everyone's silence. Almost everyone was meditating while healing their wounds. After many days of escape, everyone had gained a lot. Su Chu, the first brother of Jade Pool, who had just joined the East Emperor Palace but had never quit, had already begun to break through to the half-step thundershocking realm. Li Beitian was trying to get closer to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Now this distance was still far, but even a small step closer was good. Ning Qiancheng began to try to break through to the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. Yi Huayu tried to enter the fire-flaming realm. Yu Qingyan made the slowest progress, but she was also close to the fire-flaming realm. For this little girl, whose realm was the lowest except Li Tianlan, but whose lethality was second only to Li Tianlan, at least in the hearts of the people of the East Emperor Palace, no one dared to look down on her anymore. As for Dongqing Rushi, it could be said that she was the only outsider in this villa at present, but she also did not make things difficult for others. The 6th day after returning from Zhongjing to Changdao was about to pass, but for nearly a week, Dongqing Rushi had been in a coma all the time, and didn't even wake up once. Horsewoman had personally checked Dongqing Rushi's condition, and the conclusion she got was not bad news. It just said that the sword seemed to consume a lot of Dongqing Rushi's mind that night. The coma was just her body protecting itself and slowly recovering. If nothing went wrong, she would wake up in 10 days. Thinking about everyone's condition in the villa, Li Tianlan opened the door of the villa and shook his head subconsciously. At present, apart from Dongqing Rushi who was in a coma, his progress was the slowest, and his meditation time was the shortest. He glanced around the hall casually, trying to see who had turned on the light just now. But when he glanced at the floor-to-ceiling window in the hall, he suddenly froze. According to Horsewoman, Dongqing Rushi, who shouldn't have woken up at this time, was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with her arms around her knees. She leaned against the armrest of the sofa and tilted her head to look at the wind and rain outside the window. She didn't seem to notice Li Tianlan coming in at all. She just sat there quietly, motionless. Her slightly messy long hair was casually draped behind her head, and she was wearing white pajamas. The light in the hall was dim, so Li Tianlan couldn't see her face clearly. At this moment, Dongqing Rushi just sat there, but she was quiet like a ghost that would disappear at any time. Li Tianlan felt something was wrong. For this fiancé who could naturally treat him as her fiancé, Li Tianlan had a very strange feeling in his heart. He couldn't tell whether he liked or disliked her. It was an indescribable feeling. Emotionally, he felt that he should get closer to her, but rationally, he felt that he should stay away from her. At least until now, he hadn't figured out how to face his fiancée who didn't seem to resist the engagement at all. Li Tianlan felt a little helpless. He casually turned on the small light on the ceiling. The dim and soft light shone down from above, and the whole hall was misty. Dongqing Rushi was still motionless, as if the wind and rain outside the window had become the thing that attracted her most. Li Tianlan instinctively felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. He subconsciously frowned and asked, "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." A very ethereal and sweet voice sounded, but with a very obvious trace of indifference. "I slept for too long, so I came out to get some air." Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment. At this moment he finally realized what was wrong. The Dongqing Rushi in front of him, compared with the first time he saw her in Zhongjing, was like a completely different person. She still looked the same, but her temperament changed. Elegant melancholy, and extreme indifference. It was a kind of indifference towards everything in the world, without the slightest bit of emotion, whether it was towards others or herself. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered in the villa of the Dongqing clan. In Dongqing Rushi's room where he lived, the light gray walls that seemed to always have a gloomy and cold texture. He was in a trance, and once again remembered the first time he saw her in Zhongjing a few days ago. She was also elegant and incomparable. But the indifferent and melancholy Dongqing Rushi in front of him, and the pure and clear Dongqing Rushi that night, which one was the real her? Li Tianlan frowned again, and for a moment, he had a feeling that he didn't know what to do. "Are you not feeling well?" Dongqing Rushi didn't move and said blandly, "Is it my attitude that made you angry? I can apologize." Cold and indifferent. She seemed to be expressing her apology, but every word that came out of her mouth caused the distance between them to grow further and further apart. That night, the girl who raised her dirty little face and took the initiative to ask him to hug her seemed to have quietly died in this stormy night, without leaving a trace. Li Tianlan felt a little sad and sorry, but he didn't know why he felt sad and sorry. "No," he said calmly. "Lying." Dongqing Rushi finally looked back. In the soft and dim light, her beautiful but pale little face was expressionless, and her eyes were like cold stars staring straight into Li Tianlan's eyes. As the light flowed, her eyes were still clear, but with a strong coldness that couldn't be melted. Li Tianlan shook his head, suppressed all kinds of thoughts in his mind and said, "Are you hungry? You've been in a coma for a few days. Do you want to eat something? Can you cook?" Dongqing Rushi raised her delicate eyebrows and asked, "I can't." Li Tianlan shook his head. "But there's food in the fridge. You can make do with it." Dongqing Rushi curled her lips, and this time there seemed to be a trace of obvious mockery in her cold eyes. "I thought you were the kind of man who was good at making women happy, but you can't even cook. I really don't know what Qin Weibai likes about you." Li Tianlan inexplicably felt a surge of anger in his heart, and he couldn't help but retort, "I thought you were really a very pure and even cute little girl." "Little girl?" Dongqing Rushi suddenly interrupted Li Tianlan. She squinted her beautiful eyes and giggled. Her cold laughter had a kind of creepy charm that made people's scalps numb. "Yeah, little girl, how's my acting? Do you like that kind of stupid and cute type? Should I act for you?" Li Tianlan calmed down, and he suddenly smiled and said, "No need." Nodding, he turned around and planned to go upstairs directly. He still didn't hate Dongqing Rushi, but he instinctively wanted to stay away from a woman he couldn't see through. "What do you think of Rushi?" Dongqing Rushi suddenly spoke behind him. She took a step forward and reached out to grab Li Tianlan's arm. The question was a little strange, but the moment their bodies touched, Li Tianlan's body stiffened, but he didn't think much about it. He casually said, "I thought she was good before, but now you can't see through her?" Ha ha ha. It was still that kind of coquettish, crisp, but extremely cold voice. In such an environment, even if Li Tianlan had amazing willpower, he couldn't help sweating. While he was hesitating, Dongqing Rushi's delicate body seemed to stick to him. Her body was hot, but her tone was as cold as ice. Can't see through me? Since you came in, you've looked at my legs 3 times, my breasts twice, and my face twice. My dear fiancé, what on earth can't you see through? As your fiancé, I'm very willing to satisfy your thoughts. Her voice was soft, cold, and charming. Her hot breath directly blew into Li Tianlan's ears. My dress is not long. Can you see through me if I lift it up for you to see through me? She was almost biting Li Tianlan's ear while talking. One of her hands held Li Tianlan's palm and slid down. She actually lifted her white nightdress by a few centimeters. His fingers touched her amazingly soft thighs. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook. He subconsciously took a few steps forward, turned around, and looked at Dongqing Rushi calmly. What? Don't you like it? Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan provocatively, or teased him. I'm still a virgin. As a fiancé, isn't it normal to serve my future man? The atmosphere became more and more strange. Li Tianlan's heart gradually beat faster. For a moment, he even felt that he had seen a ghost. But the brief touch just now, the delicate but elastic warm skin, the fresh and extremely tempting fragrance in her breath, all told him how real Dongqing Rushi was in front of him. He took a deep breath and said calmly, I'll find a chance to talk about our engagement with the old master in detail. So you mean you don't want to marry me? Dongqing Rushi, who met him for the second time, seemed to be indescribably aggressive. Her cold and charming smile slowly disappeared, and she looked at Li Tianlan coldly and asked. Li Tianlan felt a headache and kept silent. Who do you think you are? Dongqing Rushi sneered and said, God? Or the Jade Emperor? Do you know what I've done for this engagement in the past 19 years? Piano, music, dance, poetry, massage, embroidery, calligraphy, painting, cooking. I know all of these things that might make you like them. Martial arts, finance, power play, politics, psychology, and interpersonal relationships. I know all of these fields that can help you. As long as I can remember, I've known about your existence. You're my fiancé, the man who will marry me in the future. Grandpa told me about this, Grandma said it before she passed away, Dad and Mom said it, and my sister also said it. When I learned swordsmanship in Jade Pool, my teacher also said it. When I went to the Border Control Corps, my godfather also said it. He talked about it for more than 10 years. Now when I hear the word Li, I think of Li Tianlan, and when I think of Li Tianlan, I think of my future husband. Do you know what instinct is? This is it. I can't resist myself. I've worked hard for more than 10 years, and the Dongqing clan has worked hard for more than 10 years, just to make you like me. What about you? You want to reject the engagement with just one sentence. I've lived for you for the past 19 years. Li Tianlan, who do you think you are? Do you have the right to break the engagement? Even after the cold and excited voice fell, it still lingered high and sharp. Li Tianlan stared at the cold and angry girl in front of him, and his brain was in a complete mess. That kind of indescribable shock and bitterness fiercely hit his heart, and even his soul. He only knew that he had an engagement with Dongqing Rushi, but he never thought that behind this engagement, the Dongqing clan would carry it out so firmly. I've lived for you for the past 19 years. These words really had a soul-stirring power. Li Tianlan opened his mouth and was speechless for a moment. You were obviously peeking at my figure just now, and now you say you don't want to marry me. Are all men so hypocritical? Dongqing Rushi asked coldly. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed and said with a bitter smile, It's different. I admit that I peeked just now. I have to say, you're really beautiful. I'm a man, not a saint. I have desires and feelings, but desire and feelings are not the same thing. Do you understand? Dongqing Rushi bit her lip and looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes seemed to be a little wronged, but they looked colder and more stubborn. So what do you want to say? Are you going to tell me that you just want to play with me, but you don't plan to marry me? For some reason, Li Tianlan hesitated for a moment, and then nodded his head. This action was so obscene, yet so honest. Dongqing Rushi was really beautiful. No one would not be tempted by such a pure and beautiful woman. Li Tianlan didn't know what he was thinking, but when he thought that she was his fiancée, he couldn't control his desire. He did want to possess this rare purity and beauty. Maybe it was the dark side of his heart. But when it came to marriage, he had never thought about it. The bride of his dream was in Huating, in Samsara Palace, not in the Dongqing clan. Saying this might make people despise him, but at least for a second, he really thought so in his heart. You really are a bastard. Dongqing Rushi's body trembled slightly. She sneered, but her eyes stared at Li Tianlan without blinking. Even if I can accept your dirty idea for the Dongqing clan, how can you let her accept it? Who? Li Tianlan's mind was completely messed up. Who else can it be? Of course it's that stupid and cute little fool, Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi sneered. Everything in front of him was spinning. Li Tianlan's body shook, and he couldn't even stand stably. He looked at the woman in front of him, stunned. After a long silence, he slowly said, Dongqing Rushi? Then who are you? Where is Dongqing Rushi? In front of him, Dongqing Rushi took a deep breath and said coldly, I'm also your fiancé. I'm Dongqing Yueshan. As for Rushi, she pointed to her head and smiled weirdly. She needs to rest. For a moment, Li Tianlan vaguely understood something, but there were still many things he didn't understand. He subconsciously lit a cigarette, and the smoke unconsciously blew to Dongqing Yueshan's face in front of him. Split personality? Li Tianlan tentatively said. Are you the other half of Rushi's personality? I should say that Rushi is my other half. Dongqing Yueshan looked cold and proud. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and took a big drag on his cigarette, silent. Dongqing Rushi had a split personality. Obviously, her main personality was the dominant one, and the Dongqing Yueshan in front of him was the secondary personality. Although she had a strong sense of autonomy, if the secondary personality was the dominant one, Li Beitian and the others couldn't have missed it after days of hunting. Obviously, the Dongqing Yueshan in front of him was silent most of the time, and the worst thing was that Dongqing Rushi obviously didn't know it. Li Tianlan smoked, and was about to speak when the phone suddenly rang. Dongqing Yueshan was stunned. She turned around and took out her phone from the tea table. It's my grandpa, she said softly. She looked at the time, then looked at Li Tianlan. She handed over the phone and said, At this time if you answer it, Grandpa will be very happy. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he subconsciously shook his head. Dongqing Yueshan looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated look, then picked up the phone and said softly, Grandpa, I'm Yueshan. There seemed to be silence on the phone for a while. Obviously, all the important figures in the Dongqing clan seemed to know the existence of Dongqing Yueshan's secondary personality, except Dongqing Rushi herself. Li Tianlan shook his head hard and didn't listen to what Dongqing Yueshan and Dongqing Hongguang said. When he came to himself, Dongqing Yueshan's call was already coming to an end. She held the phone, obviously wanting to say something but hesitating. In the end, she remained silent and hung up the phone. Li Tianlan just wanted to be quiet now. When he was about to go back to his room, Dongqing Yueshan suddenly said, Grandpa asked me to tell you something. What? Li Tianlan responded subconsciously. He said. Dongqing Yueshan's big cold eyes were a little blank. She imitated Dongqing Hongguang's tone and said slowly. He said, You should be careful of Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly moved. Dongqing Yueshan spoke very slowly. Although it was a female voice, Li Tianlan could vaguely feel Dongqing Hongguang's mood when he said this. It seemed to be difficult to say. Difficult to say. Li Tianlan thought of the meeting with Gong Sunqi just now. He frowned tightly and his heart was in a mess. Do you know Phoenix Pavilion? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Dongqing Yueshan seemed to be a little lost in thought. She subconsciously shook her head and didn't speak. Li Tianlan's heart moved. He thought of her expression just now that she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He said casually, You didn't tell the old master on the phone just now, did you? Dongqing Yueshan was slightly shocked. She hesitated. Although it was the second time she met Li Tianlan, or rather, it was the first time, the instinct instilled in her for many years seemed to make her imperfect secondary personality not know how to refuse Li Tianlan's question. She nodded, frowned, and said thoughtfully, There are experts in East Island. Li Tianlan just thought it was nonsense. He said calmly. And then? No. Dongqing Yueshan shook her head and said slowly, "When we were in Zhongjing that night, there were experts in the forest, experts of the invincible realm. Rushi's martial arts were all in the silence sword. Silence was unsheathed in advance, and that sword could be said to be a real invincible strike. But when that sword was unsheathed, it was pressed back together with all the sword intent. Even the broken scabbard was temporarily solidified by the sword intent. What does this mean?" Li Tianlan's face looked serious, and his heart sank uncontrollably. If Dongqing Rushi's sword was really an invincible strike, then the person who completely pressed back the sword meant that he crushed that sword with his own strength. What kind of strength is this? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and subconsciously murmured to himself, "I don't know. But that person that night was definitely the most powerful person I've ever seen. He didn't seem to be malicious to us, but he might not be kind either." Dongqing Yueshan shook her head and said, "The most powerful?" Li Tianlan subconsciously shook his head, somewhat disapproving. "What do you mean? Are you looking down on me?" Dongqing Yueshan's eyes suddenly became cold. "No," Li Tianlan said honestly, "but according to the frequency of your appearance, I don't think I see many people, do I? What Dongqing Rushi can see, I can also see." Chapter 193. July 1st. The undercurrent that had been brewing for many days finally broke out in East Island. The storm swept through the entire East Island. In the morning of July 1st, Huiting Chen Fangqing, the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, officially held a summit of 9 countries to put great pressure on East Island to appreciate its currency. The leaders of Zhongzhou State, Star State, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Gaul Snow Country, Italy and Mountain State all rushed to Huiting to attend the meeting. Almost at the same time, a large number of international financial speculators poured into the foreign exchange and futures market of East Island with unimaginable huge amount of capital. They cooperated with the political means of the Summit of 9 countries to push the currency of East Island to appreciate. A large group of prominent and noble surnames appeared in the sudden currency war, shining with unparalleled dazzling light. Rothschild, Morgan, Westminster, Habsburg, the Wang family of Beihai, the flourishing Age Fund. In just one day, the financial order of East Island became messy under the impact of a huge amount of capital. East Island, which was almost stunned, finally reacted. The crazy appreciation of East Island's currency was a devastating blow to the economy of East Island, which had not yet walked out of the economic recession. Therefore, there was no need to summon people. All the consortia of East Island and all the major banks spontaneously united together, desperately resisted, and protected the currency of East Island. The whole foreign exchange market was suddenly filled with smoke. The two sides were entangled together, and it was hard to tell who would win. This could be said to be the first currency war in recent years that was obviously premeditated. There were traces of human activity everywhere. Due to the time constraint, many of the arrangements were not very clever, but every huge flow of funds carried an irresistible momentum. East Island was fighting back desperately, and they didn't care about anything. But more and more international capital flowed into the foreign exchange market of East Island. The stalemate lasted for less than a week, and the so-called balance was instantly broken. The currency of East Island soared, even skyrocketed. After nearly a week of sleepless games, every fluctuation represented a large amount of money invested or lost, and the curve started to rise. For every financial giant that participated in this currency war, this was a feast for all of them. But for East Island, it was the end. East Island, which held a large amount of foreign exchange from Zhongzhou State and Star State, was completely robbed of the wealth it had accumulated for decades. The economy of the whole East Island almost collapsed. The prices in East Island were rising at an astonishing speed, and a lot of export businesses were put on hold. The bloody storm in the currency war spread like a large shadow, covering all classes in East Island. Voices of resentment filled the air, and the people were seething with resentment. In just 1 week, the currency of East Island appreciated by 1.25 times. For East Island, this was an unstoppable disaster. Although the fiercest war had passed, there were still a lot of funds pouring into East Island. Even the most famous economist in East Island said with a desperate attitude that the appreciation of East Island's currency had not come to an end. They expected that the currency of East Island would slow down when it appreciated by 2 times, and the final peak should reach about 2.5 times. If the currency of East Island appreciated by 2.5 times, it meant that tens of trillions or even more of wealth would be plundered and flowed to all over the world, and the economy of East Island would go back for at least 20 years. Under the disaster, chaos broke out in an unstoppable manner. In just half a month, countless companies and groups in East Island declared bankruptcy, and people lost their jobs every day. There were crowds in front of official institutions, and the crime rate soared. The financial groups kept putting pressure on the government while contributing money and manpower. A lot of officials fell from power for various reasons, and a lot of civilians went bankrupt overnight. The chaos was like a storm, spreading to all classes, getting worse and worse, and getting out of control. East Island, which was peaceful a few months ago, seemed to be on the verge of completely losing control. Everyone was in a terrible predicament. As the leader of the Special Warfare System of East Island, Shinichi Miyamoto felt especially stressed. The chaos of the Special Warfare System, the collapse of the currency order, and everything was interconnected. The future of East Island was dark. As the only superior of the invincible realm in East Island, Shinichi Miyamoto was facing considerable pressure almost every second. The financial groups, the cabinet, the royal family, the media. It was even said that many officials were ready to hold the Divine Wind Force accountable, and ask the Divine Wind Force to give a reasonable explanation for their cowardice and incompetence. Everyone knew that the cause of all this was the fight in the Dark World. It was especially important for Zhongzhou State to control the Special Warfare System of East Island this time. As for the summit of the 9 states held in Huiding, the leaders of other countries might not follow Zhongzhou State's lead. But this action was extremely grand and profitable, so they didn't mind giving it a push. But it was only limited to the economic field. The fight in the Dark World was unavoidable. Many forces united and targeted each other. Now that they gathered in Changdao, the Dark World and the economy were completely connected, and finally formed a very complicated situation. It was a stalemate and a dilemma. How to break out of this situation had become the primary problem that Shinichi Miyamoto was facing now. Fu Peak was covered with white snow. The flying wind and snow rolled over the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force. Several tornado-like snow pillars rose up from the top and the bottom of the mountain, majestic and spectacular. Shinichi Miyamoto stood on the highest snow-capped peak of the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force, motionless like a statue. The wind and snow all over the sky surrounded his body with a cold and deathly aura. The only superior of the invincible realm in East Island had completely concentrated his spiritual force, trying his best to perceive everything around him. In his perception, the vague danger between heaven and earth was still there, and it was getting stronger and more obscure. He couldn't detect the trace of the other party. Only a faint but extremely sharp killing intent came through the wind and snow from all directions, as sharp as a knife. Shinichi Miyamoto frowned subconsciously. The snow covering him fell off one by one. He took a deep breath, and there was a trace of coldness and anger in his deep eyes. Over the past half a month, he had received countless calls. Some were from the office of the Prime Minister, some were from the royal family, and some were from various consortiums. On the phone, the tone of the other party was different. Some were calm, some were tough, and some were respectful. But the meaning was exactly the same. They hoped that he could go down the mountain and get to Changdao as soon as possible. The current currency war was the follow-up of the conflict in the Dark World. All the dark superpowers entered Changdao at the same time. To some extent, it was a declaration of force. And the currency war was a way for all the dark superpowers to force Changdao to compromise. For decades, this was the crisis that East Island had never encountered. The intensity of this game was far beyond everyone's expectation. Shinichi Miyamoto couldn't imagine what would happen if East Island lost this game. In the current situation, the failure of the currency war seemed to be a matter of time. At least the possibility of winning had become infinitesimally small. So, how to win the Battle of Changdao became the key of all. Shinichi Miyamoto was eager to go down the mountain. However, the faintly discernible danger around him kept stimulating his nerves. The opponent's concealment ability was simply unimaginable. He clearly knew that there was an enemy that was strong enough to threaten his life hiding nearby, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not lock onto the opponent's position. The other party had trapped him on Few Peak. Shinichi Miyamoto wasn't afraid of death, but he knew that he couldn't die. Once he died, even if he was seriously injured, the situation that could still be maintained might completely collapse, and then everything would be irreversible. The wind and snow were blowing harder. The air seemed to be colder. With a heart full of depression and heaviness, Shinichi Miyamoto lifted his feet and was about to go down the mountain. Suddenly, he saw something black from the corner of his eyes. Shinichi Miyamoto turned his head subconsciously. He looked down the mountain through the howling wind and snow. At the end of his sight, a black car was slowly going up the mountain along the mountain road, getting close to the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force. It was a black car that was rarely seen in the market. The body was slender, but it was indescribably broad and heavy. It was quietly driving on the mountain road, all the way up, looking elegant and steady. Shinichi Miyamoto moved the corner of his mouth as if he wanted to laugh, but his eyes were bitter. That was a car that belonged to the royal family. He quickened his pace and quickly went down the mountain. The black car went up. Shinichi Miyamoto went down. They arrived at the gate of the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force almost at the same time. In the wind and snow, Shinichi Miyamoto calmly turned his body sideways and made a welcoming gesture. But the car that was about to enter the gate stopped beside him. The door opened, and a man who looked to be in his 30s got out of the car. He looked at Shinichi Miyamoto in front of him and said with a soft smile, "Your Highness Miyamoto, long time no see." The man was a little short, about 1.7 meters, but his smile was very friendly. He wasn't handsome, but his outline was very soft. Standing in the wind and snow, he smiled warmly, and his whole body gave people a sense of closeness like a spring breeze. Shinichi Miyamoto was alert inside, but he still looked calm. He bowed slightly and said in a calm tone, "Your Highness, please come in." The Crown Prince of East Island, Renda, the only heir of the royal family of East Island, the future Mikado of East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto still kept a calm and indifferent expression, but he sighed slightly in his heart. When all the social classes in East Island were about to collapse, Shinichi Miyamoto expected that someone from the royal family would come to put pressure on him. But it was Crown Prince Rend who came, which was beyond his expectation. This fully showed how dissatisfied the royal family was with his current performance. No need. Crown Prince Rend was still smiling. In the wind and snow, his face seemed to be wearing a mask that was fading away. His smile faded, and his eyes became cold. "I don't have much time. Today my father asked me to come here and ask you, Your Highness, what do you think of the current situation in East Island?" Shinichi Miyamoto frowned. He didn't want to speak, but he had to. "Your Highness, the situation is chaotic now. I need some time." "Okay." Crown Prince Ren didn't wait for Shinichi Miyamoto to finish and said with a smile, "Of course I have time. East Island could give you time, but who could give East Island time? You must know how many forces are gathering in Changdao. Your Highness Miyamoto, right?" Shinichi Miyamoto looked cold and didn't say a word, as if he didn't hear Crown Prince Ren's sarcasm. Fantasy World, Samsara, Dark Knights, Knights Templars, the Wang family of Beihai, the Jiang family of South America, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club. Crown Prince Ren's tone became sharper and sharper. Almost all the superpowers in the Dark World have gathered in Changdao, and some unidentified experts are also taking action. These people are either freelance mercenaries or experts who can represent the will of a country to a certain extent. Your Highness Miyamoto, do you still need time in this situation? Is 1 year enough? 10 years? Is one lifetime enough? Shinichi Miyamoto looked at Crown Prince Ren coldly and said in a gloomy tone, "Your Highness, please watch your tone. This is not the attitude a crown prince should have to a superior of the invincible realm. I know what you know. There are 8 superpowers in Changdao and they have made their positions clear, but I don't think they will unite. In fact, Knights Templars is on our side, and we can fight for the position of the Jiang family of South America. In fact, Fantasy World has already fought with the Polar Ground Alliance in Changdao. In fact, a team of nearly 20 people from the Heroes Club died in the raid of the Dark Knights. Crown Prince Ren sneered and said, "So what? All the superpowers are enemies with each other, but their common enemy is East Island. Do you really think Knights Templars will help us? They are only after their own interests. I'm sure that once the situation is out of control, Knights Templars will deal with us first." No matter how hostile the superpowers are to each other, the most important thing for them now is the interests of East Island. Your Highness Miyamoto, I can tell you some facts. Right now, a lot of people are contacting our 3 consortiums. As for Shitian Financial Group, Humph, this currency war gave them the best chance. Currently, more than 50% of Shitian Financial Group's assets have been transferred overseas, in the name of being acquired, of course. Another small and medium-sized consortium also started contacting the superpowers. In the past half a month, nearly 800,000 people in East Island lost their jobs, and 9 countries announced that they would sanction our economy and trade. It's only been half a month. 1 month, half a year later. To what extent will the situation develop? At that time, whose East Island will it be? Shinichi Miyamoto's face finally changed. He knew some of the information that Crown Prince Ren said, but he didn't know some. At least, he didn't have the information about the consortiums. This shouldn't have happened. Right now, many of our consortiums and families are still supporting us, but because of your incompetence, they are about to lose confidence in the Divine Wind Force. Your Highness Miyamoto, let's take a guess. What will they do when they lose confidence in East Island? Shinichi Miyamoto's face looked worse and worse. But once Crown Prince Ren's assumption became true, he shuddered at the thought of the consequences. He didn't want to care about Crown Prince Ren's tone anymore. There was something wrong with the intelligence of the Divine Wind Force. He didn't expect that in such a short time, the undercurrent of East Island had become so dangerous in this storm that swept the whole territory. You know, Your Highness Miyamoto, the royals have always respected you. But your silence during this time has deeply disappointed the royals. Many people in the royals think it was a wrong decision to let you and Liuhua Palace control the Divine Wind Force. Crown Prince Ren said blandly. Shinichi Miyamoto snorted with a gloomy face. He suppressed his anger and said slowly, "Well, Your Highness Miyamoto, you didn't come here to express your disappointment to me, did you? What instructions does the Mikado have for you?" "My father didn't give me any instructions." Crown Prince Ren shook his head and said coldly, "He just asked me to tell you something. This situation must end as soon as possible. If the Divine Wind Force isn't capable enough, the royals and the cabinet will consider compromise." Shinichi Miyamoto's face changed dramatically. He looked at Crown Prince Ren and raised his voice shouting, "Compromise? That's the only way," Crown Prince Ren said coldly. Shinichi Miyamoto was speechless. Of course, he knew what compromise meant. All the superpowers entered Changdao for the right to speak in the special warfare system of East Island, and the huge benefits from this dark power. If the royals compromised, it meant giving up everything in the special warfare system of East Island. From then on, the whole East Island would become a dark world without the special warfare system, a battlefield for all the dark worlds to fight against each other. In this way, it could indeed intensify the conflicts between the dark forces. But it was easier to invite them and then to send them away. Once the special warfare system of East Island disappeared, it would be almost impossible to rebuild it under the eyes of the dark forces. Even if it could be rebuilt, it would take countless years. And during this time, without the special warfare power, East Island wouldn't be able to fight unless a full-scale war broke out. And, if they compromised, Shinichi Miyamoto himself would definitely become a bargaining chip. The superiors of the invincible realm were indeed important, but in front of the general trend, they were just nonentities. "We can't compromise." Shinichi Miyamoto gritted his teeth and said coldly, "The consequences of compromise are really serious." Crown Prince Ren said calmly, "But the consequences of not compromise are more serious. The special warfare system will be destroyed, the economy of East Island will collapse, all the consortiums will betray East Island, and foreign funds will control the will of East Island and run amok. At least for now, we can't afford the consequences, can we? It's better to negotiate with them and compromise. Then, at least we can control something that belongs to us. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said coldly, "Even if we compromise, who do you want to talk to? The Summit of 9 Nations. Is it?" Crown Prince Ren glanced at Shinichi Miyamoto and said casually, "Of course we want to talk to Zhongzhou State." Shinichi Miyamoto kept silent, but he gradually understood the plan of the royals. A large number of elite superiors of East Island and 2 superiors of the Invincible Realm were trapped in Zhongzhou State. If the royals compromised, those people would naturally become bargaining chips. After East Island compromised, the special warfare system would be annexed by Zhongzhou State, and its economy would suffer a heavy blow, but it could barely stabilize itself. Most importantly, if East Island gave up on these, it could bring all the superiors trapped in Zhongzhou State back to East Island. By then, Liuhua Palace might become the sacrifice of compromise, but Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace would still exist, and there was still a glimmer of hope to take back the special warfare system of East Island in the future. This process might take decades, but for the current East Island, as long as there was hope, it was good. And these decades would also be conducive to Zhongzhou State's continued expansion in the Dark World, and maintaining its position as the world overlord. More importantly, Kunlun City. If Zhongzhou State occupied the special warfare system of East Island, the power of Kunlun City would definitely be the most important. And there might be something that could not be negotiated between East Island and Gu Xingyun. Before Li Guangtu, the superior of the Invincible Realm in Zhongzhou State, committed treason, Gu Xingyun and East Island had a negotiation. After that war, didn't it lead to more than a decade of peace and stability? Until this moment, Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly realized that if East Island persisted, it would be a bottomless abyss ahead of them. But if they retreated, there would be leeway everywhere. Of course, it would be best if they could win. But if they couldn't, compromise was the best way to deal with the worst situation. And the price, specifically for individuals, was Shinichi Miyamoto's own life and the survival of Liuhua Palace. Shinichi Miyamoto's heart kept sinking. The cold wind and snow on few peaks seemed to penetrate his body, chilling him to the bone. But his eyes gradually became determined. 7 days. After a short silence, Shinichi Miyamoto finally opened his mouth. His body gradually straightened up in the wind and snow, and the extremely sharp killing intent instantly spread out. The wind and snow between heaven and earth suddenly began to gather around his body. Shinichi Miyamoto stood where he was, but his body was like an indomitable spirit, with a kind of indifference that looked down on the world. "Tell His Majesty the Mikado that I will solve everything in Changdao within 7 days. He paused and then continued, "East Island will never compromise." Under such a momentum, Crown Prince Ren, who was aggressive just now, seemed to be a little inferior. He took a deep look at Shinichi Miyamoto, nodded and said, 7 days? I will tell my father. Besides, I will go to Changdao with Your Highness. Your Highness, are you going to join the war too? Shinichi Miyamoto's tone was still indifferent. Of course. Crown Prince Ren said calmly. If we can fight, who will compromise? This war concerns the fate of East Island, as well as our life and death. He bowed deeply to Shinichi Miyamoto and said respectfully, Your Highness Miyamoto, please take care of me. Take care of each other. Crown Prince Ren nodded, turned around, got in the car and left. Shinichi Miyamoto still stood where he was, in the wind and snow. He didn't turn around until the black car left his sight. He said flatly, Come out. I've made up my mind. Chapter 194. The last cloud of snow flew up to the sky with the resolute voice. Dusk fell on Fuyong Peak. The flying snow stopped. A vague and illusory figure had appeared in front of Shinichi Miyamoto. Cooperate. He looked at Shinichi Miyamoto and asked with a chuckle. In front of the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force, all the snowflakes were strangely suspended in the air within a radius of 100 meters, motionless. The cold wind that pervaded the mountains seemed to have completely disappeared. Within a radius of 100 meters, it was like a silent and still world. Shinichi Miyamoto stood where he was, letting the opponent's domain cover him completely. His eyes grew cold and he said in a mocking tone, "Of course I want to cooperate. But is this your sincerity?" The domain that covered the wind and snow shrank a little, but it was more condensed. The shadow in front of Shinichi Miyamoto was almost invisible in the night. It was vague and sometimes visible, but it carried a sharp killing intent. Facing Shinichi Miyamoto's mockery, the illusory shadow smiled and said softly, "Your Mikado is very bold, and so is His Highness Miyamoto. But I'm not. In the territory of the divine wind force, it's always good to be cautious, isn't it?" A cold light flashed in Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes. He said blandly, "You heard my conversation with Crown Prince Rend." "Yes. In 7 days, you have to completely solve everything in East Island. With all due respect, it's almost impossible for you to do it according to the current situation. It's impossible for you to fight against the general trend that can crush a country on your own." The Black Shadow's tone was cold. Shinichi Miyamoto was not angry. He just stood there quietly and thought for a while. Then he said blandly, "What if we cooperate? It's the general trend. No one can do anything about it. The most we can do is reduce the loss." The Black Shadow's body became clearer in the still domain. "If we cooperate, no matter how bad the result is, the special warfare system of East Island won't be removed from the Dark World forever." Shinichi Miyamoto was silent, as still as a statue. "His Highness Miyamoto, I'm here with full sincerity to cooperate with you. You've imprisoned me for many days. Facing the current situation, haven't you made up your mind?" The cold and creepy voice of the Black Shadow continued. Shinichi Miyamoto just sneered. At the very least, Shinichi Miyamoto treated the word imprisoned as *T. Evil, who ranked third on the divine list in the Dark World, was the top killer in the Dark World. He might die, but how could he be imprisoned? Shinichi Miyamoto knew that he did not have the ability to imprison an invincible realm expert who ranked higher than him on the holy list. However, Evil had been in the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force recently. He was so quiet that he didn't look like the strongest killer in the Dark World. Shinichi Miyamoto was lost in thought. That day, Evil came to the Divine Wind Force and invited him to kill Li Tianlan. He kept saying that it was for the overall situation. At that time, Evil did not agree, but neither did he refuse. He just used consideration as an excuse to invite Evil to stay in the Divine Wind Force and discuss it. Originally, he did not take the invitation seriously, but he did not expect that Evil actually stayed for many days. Evil did not urge him to do anything. Until today, when he had no choice, Evil appeared in front of him calmly. It was as if the other party had already predicted that he would encounter today's situation. Shinichi Miyamoto's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly said, "When you invited me to kill Li Tianlan, who's your employer?" Evil's figure became illusory again. He was standing in front of Shinichi Miyamoto, but his whole body seemed to be wrapped in mist. No one could see his face or figure clearly. Although His Highness Miyamoto is a ninja, don't tell me that you don't even know the basic rules of a killer? The most basic rule of a killer was not to expose any information about the employer. Shinichi Miyamoto was calm and collected. He had gradually figured out some things, and he was more confident in his heart. Now he needed to cooperate with Evil. Evil also needed his help. Otherwise, with his strength, he could kill Li Tianlan. No matter how powerful Li Tianlan was, he would have died hundreds of times. Besides, the commission alone cost him hundreds of millions. It was not difficult to find Li Tianlan's whereabouts in East Island, and Evil would never lack opportunities to kill Li Tianlan. As for the revenge of Samsara after Li Tianlan's death, it would indeed make Evil worry. But if he was really afraid, he wouldn't have accepted the deal. Shinichi Miyamoto became calmer and calmer. He was almost sure that the reason why Evil was still here was that he had something that Evil needed. "What do you want?" Shinichi Miyamoto asked in a low voice. He didn't ask what Evil could give him. Once they cooperated, at least Evil would be on their side. The combat capability of an invincible realm expert was a priceless treasure in a critical moment. Even if Divine Wind Force didn't have any help except Evil, East Island would have to pay a high price for Evil alone. "I want Yada no Kagami." Evil was silent for a while, and then he said in a calm and serious tone. Shinichi Miyamoto's face suddenly changed. Since Evil showed up, this was the first time he showed real anger and killing intent. Do you know what you're talking about? Shinichi Miyamoto said in a cold voice. Yada no Kagami, one of the legendary mirror jade swords of East Island, was the symbol of the power of the Mikado, and was also one of the 3 legendary divine weapons of East Island. Most people thought that the legend was just a legend, but only a few people knew that the mirror jade swords of East Island did exist, and they were indeed divine weapons. But this divine weapon didn't have any earth-shattering lethality. To some extent, the 3 divine weapons were even more fragile than the most common porcelain. But the existence of the 3 divine weapons was really related to the fate of the country. Fate seemed mysterious, but it was fixed since ancient times. Fate, destiny, and fixed number. In that unknown or barely understood field, there was a hidden power that everyone was in awe of. It didn't seem to exist, but it was everywhere. And the 3 divine weapons of East Island stored the fate of the country of East Island. The 3 divine weapons symbolized the power of the royals. When the special warfare system of East Island was first established, and before Wuji Palace was founded, the Mikado gave Yada no Kagami and Kusanagi to Lyohua Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School respectively, and Yasukani no Magatama was placed in the headquarters of Divine Wind Force, which represented the absolute control of the special warfare system of East Island by the royals. After the establishment of Wuji Palace, the Mikado gave Yasukani no Magatama to Tianhai Wuji. Now the 3 divine weapons belonged to the 3 major schools, which regarded them as their lives. The royals didn't seem to have any real power in recent years, but the special warfare system was the most fundamental thing of the royals. That was why Shinichi Miyamoto lost his composure when he learned that the royals were going to use the special warfare system as a bargaining chip. It could be seen how miserable the Mikado was when he made this decision. But even if it was a compromise, even if the Mikado gave up Lyohua Palace and the special warfare system temporarily, he couldn't give up Yada no Kagami, the divine weapon that controlled the fate of the country. Evil asked for Yada no Kagami, which was crazy. Shinichi Miyamoto heaved a sigh of relief. Vaguely, he seemed to see a black hand taking advantage of the situation. In the chaotic situation, the black hand directly reached into the most inviolable area of East Island through evil. Black Hand, this codename Black Hand. Shinichi Miyamoto's body shook violently. He suddenly guessed who Evil's employer was. In the whole dark world, there was only one family that was most obsessed with fate. The Jiang family of South America. The behemoth that almost dominated Zhongzhou state. Shinichi Miyamoto suppressed his intense emotions and said coldly, "This is not something I can decide. But you should know very well that we can't give you Yada no Kagami no matter what." Evil was silent for a while, and his tone became solemn. "Maybe you should listen to what we can give you." "No need." Shinichi Miyamoto rudely interrupted him and said coldly, "This is not something I can decide. A murderous weapon. Besides me, there is also an invincible realm expert and a half-step invincible realm expert. These bargaining chips are only for 1 month of Yada no Kagami. Just 1 month. We are just borrowing it. Can't His Highness Miyamoto make a decision with such conditions? Borrowing. For any high-level official of East Island, this was an extremely sensitive word. Back then, the Wang family of Beihai also borrowed their big island of Beihai. But for hundreds of years, they had no intention of returning it, and there was no possibility of returning it. If the Jiang family of South America was really behind evil. But in this situation, evil's bargaining chip was tempting enough. If they could make a deal, then East Island would have 3 superiors of the invincible realm, and a murderous weapon. It was like sending charcoal in the snowy weather. I can understand why you hesitated at the beginning. When Li Kuangtu committed treason, East Island was one of the biggest beneficiaries, wasn't it? Li Tianlan is also from the Li family. Maybe you want to. Oh, your plan is good, but now you have no conditions to implement it. Cooperating with us is your only choice. After all, we are the only ones who can help you get through this. Evil's illusory figure became clearer and clearer, and his tone became more sincere. Is Li Tianlan related to Yada no Kagami? Shinichi Miyamoto asked. To be exact, both Yada no Kagami and Li Tianlan are related to us. Coveting the divine weapon of East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto narrowed his eyes and said calmly, the Jiang family of South America is really bold. The wind and snow in the sky suddenly quieted down. Evil's eyes instantly condensed like divine light. Shinichi Miyamoto said to himself. You and the Jiang family of South America are not simply employers, right? The Jiang family. I know Jiang Qiansong. I know Jiang Qianyan with the code name Black Hand. What about you? Or should I call you Third Master Jiang? Evil looked at Shinichi Miyamoto with cold eyes. After a long time, he said blandly, what's the point of saying this? Miyamoto, my offer is good enough. We both take what we need. If you don't agree, I need to add one more condition. Shinichi Miyamoto said quickly, East Island's economy is in trouble now if. There is no if. Evil shook his head. At present, the Jiang family has no extra funds to support you, nor is it obliged to. Our cooperation is limited to the dark world, that's all. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep look at Evil and nodded coldly. The fact that the Jiang family didn't have extra funds meant a lot. For a giant like the Jiang family, its liquidity was definitely an astronomical figure, but now it didn't have extra funds. There was no doubt that the Jiang family's funds were also wreaking havoc on the economy of East Island. Somehow, Shinichi Miyamoto seemed to know where the two mysterious funds that almost destroyed the economy of East Island came from. At least one of them probably belonged to the Jiang family, an ally of the dark world, an economic enemy. The Yada no Kagami is very important. I have to report it to His Majesty the Mikado. Shinichi Miyamoto said blandly. Before that, I can't give you any answer. Then do it as soon as possible. You only have 7 days, and you can't afford to delay it. Evil chuckled and said. Shinichi Miyamoto seemed to have made up his mind. He said calmly, then let's go now. You and I go down the mountain. I'll talk to His Majesty the Mikado. He took a deep breath, calmly concentrated, and left the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force as fast as he could. Evil froze for a second, and then followed him. The white snow and the icy wind whistled past. Shinichi Miyamoto became more and more nervous, and he instinctively guarded against everything around him. The Divine Wind Force was getting farther and farther behind him. When Shinichi Miyamoto stepped on the snow line, the sense of danger that had been lingering in his heart for days finally faded away. Shinichi Miyamoto let out a sigh of relief, and then he realized that he was soaked in cold sweat. That unimaginable sense of oppression and lethal threat was simply inconceivable. Shinichi Miyamoto walked down the mountain with a gloomy face, and then he said goodbye to Evil at the foot of the mountain. One of them went straight to the Imperial Palace. One of them went straight to the airport. Under the night sky, Evil squinted and watched Shinichi Miyamoto's figure disappear from his sight. After a long time he took out his phone, dialed a number and said calmly he agreed. Very good. On the phone, a calm and steady voice rang out. This is a disaster for East Island, but it's an opportunity for us. You must kill Li Tianlan as soon as possible with the Yada no Kagami no Kagami. Evil agreed and was about to turn around. On Fu Peak, an earth-shattering bang suddenly spread in the dim night sky. The completely violent killing intent almost filled the whole Fu Peak. The original location of the Divine Wind Force's headquarters was suddenly as bright as day in the night sky. The crazy twisting airflow directly tore the snow-capped peak, and a large amount of flying snow rose up like a sky curtain. Vaguely, the whole headquarters of the Divine Wind Force was shaking. The violent killing intent rose to the extreme in an instant, and the twisting airflow was completely shattered. The sky curtain made of snow was torn by the killing intent, and the aura of death spread and disappeared. The flying snow fell to the ground, and the sudden killing intent disappeared in an instant, leaving no trace. In a trance, the explosion at that moment seemed to tear the heaven and earth. Evil suddenly froze on the spot. The corner of his mouth twitched. He held the phone and said with a bitter smile, "The Divine Wind Force was attacked, and the opponent is an expert, a real expert. If I'm not wrong, this style should be Tribulation's Divine Wind Force in this situation. Forget it, brother. We 3 invincible realm experts should be in place as soon as possible. It's not 3. On the phone, the calm voice was silent for a second, and then said coldly, it's 4. On the same day, almost at the same time, when the general trend began to focus and completely break out in East Island, storms also broke out in Northern Europe and North America. In North America, the branch of Knights Templars was raided almost unprepared. The raiders were divided into several forces, and almost wiped out all the strongholds of Knights Templars in North America in one day. And the branch of Fantasy World in Northern Europe was even more chaotic. Dark Knights, Knights Templars, Samsara, Heroes Club, big and small forces directly broke out in the fiercest melee under the guidance of a mysterious force. All the forces of Fantasy World were directly removed from Northern Europe before anyone had time to react. After the fierce battle, this mysterious force that seemed to have been lurking for a long time started to sort out all kinds of resources as soon as possible. The headquarters of Fantasy World in North America could do nothing about what happened in Northern Europe. The headquarters of Knights Templars in Northern Europe could do nothing about what happened in North America. At this time, a large number of elites of these two forces were deeply trapped in Zhongzhou State or Changdao. Although the forces left in the headquarters were not weak, the major branches were extremely empty. When the 2 invincible realm experts attacked at the same time, they were immediately defeated. But the local officials did not make any sound. They had a completely indifferent attitude. On this day, the name of the Snowdance Corps shone through the whole dark world. On this day, Situt Songyue and Gu Qianchuan also officially appeared in Northern Europe and North America. The whole dark world was in turmoil. Almost all of the dark forces started to move. Some people still rushed to Changdao, but some people began to rush to Northern Europe and North America. The general trend was still gathering in East Island, but the storm had swept through the whole dark world. East Island, North America, Northern Europe. There were opportunities and interests everywhere in the 3 battlefields. There were more than 3 battlefields. As the Snowdance Corps surfaced, everyone knew that the 4th battlefield was about to appear. Huating Zhongzhou State. Everyone in the dark world was moving. They had to move. Under the general trend, even the superiors of the invincible realm were like non-entities. If they couldn't advance, they would die. Who could retreat unscathed? You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.